The story began with a stone monster attacking a man with a shield in his hands. A man with a spear in his hands asked to hold on. A low-level dungeon is the lair of the Margot Golem. The stone monster hit the man with a shield and broke it. The man in armor shouted for him not to take the blow and to take it away. The guy was struggling to hold back the stone monster's attack with an iron sword. And the guy with a black blade shouted that they were going to attack. The guy hit the stone monster, after which his eyes lit up with red light. The stone monster completely began to glow red and began to move straight at the guys. The guy with the shield in his hands shouted in fear that they were furious. He asked everyone to take a defensive position, and the magicians finished him off. Someone's hand raised a staff with a yellow stone from which rays emanated. The guy in the cap turned to the guy Haruto and asked, "Mananos, why are you sleeping?" He asked to pour mana into him. Sano Haruto, Hunter Class, Level 29, nickname Mananos. Haruto closed his eyes, and then blue magic appeared in his hand, which he directed at the guy in the cap. The guy in the cap smiled and happily said that this should be enough to defeat the great golem. The stone monster began to scream, and red light emanated from its eyes. The guy in the cap pointed a staff with a yellow stone at the monster and told it to die. After a while, Haruto sat down on the ground and exhaled heavily. The man in armor approached Haruto and said that from Hunter Sano, today, as always, zero help. He asked him to go help sort out the loot. Haruto looked at the man in armor in surprise and agreed. The guy asked, "He is a hunter dealer, right? Then why is he put in the rear as support?" The guy said that his skills are useless, but he can endlessly generate mana. Haruto listened to the guy's conversation in silence. The guy in green asked in surprise, "Infinitely generate mana? But isn't that the most useful ability?" The guy in the suit exhaled thoughtfully and asked, "What's so special about that? Mages and healers can also absorb mana. So it's only needed during a boss fight, when you need a lot of mana." The guy in the cap raised his hand in front of him and said contentedly, "That's why he hasn't been able to reach level 30 for 5 years. Even the weakest hunter will be much stronger than an ordinary person." Haruto clicked his tongue in displeasure and thought, "What bastards. They speak loudly on purpose so he can hear, but they won't break him." Meanwhile, in the Taiken Guild, Haruto slapped his hand on the table in surprise and asked, "What does that mean? He, a hunter, was transferred to the production department?" The man in the suit said that the thing is that no one else wants to take him into the dungeon. Besides, he was level 29, which meant no one would let him into the dungeon alone. And his only skill was mana generation. Haruto pointed at himself and said discontentedly, because his mana had been useful to many. He had just a little bit left until 30, if he gave him a chance. The man said that healers and mages usually had mana absorption skills. In most raids, he would be like a fifth wheel. He asked if he thought level 30 would change anything. Haruto was about to say something in fear, but he was interrupted. The man in the suit said that the guild had simply decided to develop his strengths. He would fit in perfectly in the mana potion production department. Haruto angrily asked, if he refused, would they kick him out of the guild? The man in the suit apologized and said that Sano was not developing. They could not keep him in the guild any longer. After a while, there was a drink in a black and red can on the bench and some food nearby. Haruto grabbed his throat and said with pain that he lost his job in an instant. Everyone thinks that his skill is endlessly generating mana and transferring it to allies. But in fact, it is a more special skill that he did not tell anyone. Haruto took the food in his hand. He said surprisingly he received it before he became a hunter. He extended his hand with food in front of him and a blue plate appeared in front of him. It asked, "Copy the target?" Haruto pressed a button and suddenly a blue glow appeared from his hand, after which a copy of the food appeared. He said that these abilities allow you to copy objects. Immediately after waking up, he realized that this skill is quite useless for a hunter. At first, he was delighted with this ability. However, it turned out that it was only available to him. Haruto put the copy of the food on the bench and it disappeared. Haruto said that as soon as the object enters from his hands, it disappears like a mirage. That's why he can't copy money or resell copied equipment. Haruto took a bite of food and thought, well, what's most annoying is that there's a level limit to copying equipment. A dagger appeared in front of him. The dagger of loyalty can be used at level 90 and above, and has one skill slot. Due to the user's level mismatch, it's impossible to copy an object. Haruto said that it's called Mananos because it generates endless mana, but in reality, a magical glow appeared around Haruto. He said that he simply copies and pastes a small amount of absorbed mana. The copied mana does not disappear and can be given to other hunters. He tried to copy skills in the same way. But to do that, he had to kill high-level monsters. Haruto angrily squeezed the drink can and said that if he could level up and copy good equipment, then they would all see what he's capable of. I wish he could reach at least level 30. Haruto picked up the phone. It was a long sword, its handle was in the form of bat wings and it said, "Breaking news, the Corrisian Dragon long sword is coming to Japan." He said that this sword has 2 special skill slots and greatly increases defense. Also, this sword is unique because it has its own level. As soon as the sword is picked up, the level of use increases by 200. But what's cool about this blade is that it can be used from level 30. Haruto thought that this is a great legendary sword for a hunter like him. Haruto stood contentedly in black armor, the Corrisian Dragon's sword in his hand. He thought that if he copied this sword, he would become a level 230 hunter. This is his ticket to a happy life. Haruto said that in a week it will be shown at an exhibition in Japan. This legendary blade has only 10% of its durability left, and is only good for a few raids. So the owners wanted to make money on it in another way. Haruto smiled madly and started pressing something on his phone. He thought that this was a great chance for him. If he could touch it even once, no matter how much durability it had, he would be able to recreate this blade forever. He had to ascend at any cost. A few days later, there were spider monsters in the dungeon. The guy with the sword in his hands, the guy in the blue shirt, and the guy with the headband were dealing with the spider monsters. The lair of the Great Spider is an unregistered dungeon in the Hunters Association. The guy with the yellow ones in the jacket turned back and asked for mana. Haruto put his hands in front of him and sent mana to the guy. Fire appeared from the guy in the jacket's staff and began to spread in the dungeon. He began to laugh madly and shouted for them all to burn. Haruto covered his face with his hand and thought about how much he hated fire mages in a closed room. After a while, a blue sign appeared in front of Haruto. He said that he would check the level now. Suddenly, a guy in armor came up to him from behind and asked him with satisfaction, "Is he checking the status again?" No matter how much he looked, nothing would change. Haruto looked back in fear and said that he just wanted to prepare before the boss battle. Ikunaga always slyly said that he hoped he liked the show in the front row, and asked if they should charge him a fee in that case. Haruto said displeasedly, "What kind of fee?" He thought about his guildmate Ikunaga Aoi. He said that when they finished drinking from him. Haruto exhaled easily and thought about earning money. He has been going down to unregistered dungeons since childhood. Although this is a dangerous dungeon, unregistered in the Hunter Association. Thanks to him, he can accompany high-ranking hunters. Suddenly, someone's voice shouted for them to finish and move on, as the boss arena was very close. He asked them to hurry. After a while, an unfamiliar voice told them to stop, as this was the clutch of a great spider. On a stone column lay a monster, and under it lay large eggs. Alexa, the boss of the dungeon, level 80. Haruto thought with fear that his knees were buckling from just looking at it. Aoi turned to Haruto and said that no one would send him into battle. He had nothing to fear. Killing a great spider is easy, but you need to be careful. The main thing is to carefully watch her web. If he gets caught, he will not get out. You also need to be careful with her eggs. If you break them, the great spider will go berserk. And if she goes berserk, they will all be finished. The guy asked discontentedly, "Why is he wasting time on this mononos?" Aoi smiled contentedly and apologized. The guy in the sweater said that they do not have time and let him distract them. They already took him out of the kindness of their hearts. Suddenly, a stone flew out from under the guy with the staff's feet and flew straight into the web. All the guys looked up and suddenly saw an angry monster in front of them. Suddenly, a stone flew out from under the guy's feet and flew straight into the web. All the guys looked up and suddenly saw an angry monster in front of them. The man who held the shield in his hand shouted, "He is a fucking idiot." Because of his conversations, she woke up. The monster's paw hit the man's shield straight. He asked to remove his hairy legs and cut the monster's paw. The man with the bandage on his head turned around and warned that they need to be careful with the web and eggs. The guys said in one voice, "Okay," and started attacking the monster. Haruto looked out from behind a stone column and happily watched everything that was happening. He thought about how they were needing her. If he was lucky, he would rise to level 35 right away. Suddenly, the monster turned around. The guy with the bandage on his head turned to the others and shouted that she was releasing a web. Everyone needed to hide behind the columns. The guy with yellow and an orange sweater raised his fire staff and asked contentedly, "Why run?" He had defeated such people more than once. He asked everyone to step back and said that he would burn the monster along with the web. Suddenly, the monster began to release a web, creating a shield in front of him. The guy asked in surprise, did she reflect his fireball? He said displeasedly, well, that's it, she made him angry. Now he will show her his true power. Haruto shouted that he shouldn't, because that would only make things worse. Fireballs formed above the guy with the staff. He laughed madly and shouted, meteor shower. The guy with the bandage on his head shouted at him, stupid idiot, he can hit the eggs. The guy with the staff in his hands stood in a stupor. Haruto said in fear, it's too late. Suddenly, the eggs began to crack. The guy with the bandage on his head fearfully ordered everyone to run, because she's going to go crazy. The guy in the sweater was completely pinned to the ground by the web. Aoi shouted to Sano to quickly climb the columns. When the monster goes crazy, it shoots webs in all directions. Haruto stood in a stupor and watched the monster. Suddenly, a web flew into his face. Part of the web freed the guy with yellow in the sweater. He asked, how so? His fireball didn't work on the web. The monster approached him. The guy in the orange shirt nervously said, no need. He screamed in fear for the monster not to come near him, and to get away. The monster swung its paw and pressed the guy in the orange shirt into the ground. Haruto, chained to the ground by the web, watched in horror. Suddenly, the monster began to approach Haruto. He thought that this was an ordinary low-level dungeon. He just needed one damn level, and now he was going to die like this. Suddenly, the monster plunged its paw into Haruto and blood flew all over the floor. In fact, his skill is not so useless. Haruto was standing in a blue magic circle. He said that objects disappear after being copied. However, this rule does not work for his body. So, just in case, he created a copy of himself. Suddenly, the copy of Haruto began to disappear. When he dies, his consciousness moves to the copy, and the dead body disappears. Haruto gritted his teeth and thought that he would never get used to this sight. But there was no other way. Suddenly, the monster's paw dug into Haruto again. He thought, not again. After a few seconds, he hid behind a pillar and thought that the monster would not let him go, even if he copied himself endlessly. Suddenly, Haruto looked to the side and was surprised. Aoi was tied to the pillar with a web and was asking for help. Haruto asked Aoi, is he alive? He turned his head away and apologized, he doesn't know how to help. Suddenly, the monster headed towards them. Haruto took out his blade and rushed towards Aoi. He thought about how he helped him when everyone else abandoned him. If he doesn't do anything, what kind of friend is he? Haruto swung his sword and cut the monster's paw, and then flew to the ground. He looked at Aoi and thought, great, he wasn't hurt. Suddenly, a blue table appeared in front of him. It said that the level had increased. Haruto looked at it questioningly and asked in surprise, did he increase the level? Did his attack really work? Suddenly, the monster attacked Haruto again. He thought that the level had increased. All that was left was to copy the long sword of the Corisian dragon. Haruto took a fighting stance and said since he would not be able to escape, he would kill it, even if he had to die 100 times. The main thing is to inflict at least some damage in one life. Haruto headed straight for the monster and said, with his skill, he has no chance. His death, a matter of time, spider. 3 days later, since then he fought day and night, and spent about 50 lives. He broke almost all the weapons that their group brought with them. But during this time, his skills have improved significantly. Unexpectedly, Haruto cut the monster in half with his sword. The great spider was getting weaker with each passing minute. Luckily, she doesn't have regeneration. Suddenly, the spider monster turned around and started attacking Haruto with a web. But he deftly dodged it and thought, 4 projectiles at once. Suddenly, the monster's paw appeared in front of him. Haruto climbed it and climbed straight up, swung his sword and shouted for it to die already. When suddenly, from Haruto's attack, the sword split into 2 parts. He flew down and said that he forgot to copy and paste. Haruto fell to the ground and suddenly a spider monster appeared in front of him. Haruto looked at the monster in fear, when suddenly the monster's body flew apart. He lay on the ground and happily said, great, finally. How does he like that, spider? He, Sano Haruto, defeated him. Suddenly, a lot of blue tables began to appear in front of him. It said level up. Reward received for destroying the great spider. After a while, Haruto carried Aoi on his back and asked if he remembered how they wanted to drink after clearing the dungeon. He promises to treat him to the best whiskey. Suddenly, something hit Haruto in the side. He looked up and saw the newborn children of the level 30 great spider in front of him. Haruto exclaimed, "They are kidding me, he doesn't have a weapon anymore." He thought that he could handle it, but it would be difficult to fight while protecting Aoi at the same time. Haruto covered Aoi and was ready for the monster's attack, when suddenly a blue wave cut the monster in half. In front of them stood a girl with a tail on her head. She shouted, "Hellfire," and released blue magic from her staff, attacking the monsters. Hellfire is the ultimate fire magic spell. There are only a few mages in the entire world who can freely control it. Haruto looked at the girl in surprise and thought that if his memory serves him correctly, there was only one such mage in Japan. A knight mage who used a witch sword. Ranked 5th in the Japanese hunter rankings. In front of him stood a girl in a robe and holding a staff. She looked at Haruto and asked, "Are they the only survivors?" Haruto picked up Aoi and agreed. The girl looked at the battlefield and thought about the children of the great spider. So the eggs cracked and she went crazy. It seemed like the high-level party was completely wiped out. She looked at Haruto and thought, but he managed to defeat the dungeon boss? And even saved his comrade? He was clearly a low-level hunter. How did he do that? Meanwhile, at the Japanese Hunter Association, in the interrogation room, Haruto awkwardly said that if Nanes hadn't come, they would really be grateful to them. And to the dungeon manager too. Nanes said that she was just doing her job. She put a scroll of spider web on the table and said that all the items and reports about the great spider had been turned in. Nanes said that they could go. Haruto looked at her questioningly and said that a group of high-level adventurers bought a pass to enter an unregistered dungeon. Almost all of them died there, and she was just letting them go. Nanes asked, "Do they want to stay?" She said that adventurers die every day in dozens, even hundreds of unregistered dungeons. They sign an agreement to accept this risk in the entry and exit declaration. And about the low-level hunters who pay bribes to illegally participate in dungeons in order to increase their level. The association simply turns a blind eye to it. The desire to become stronger is natural for any hunter. Even if it is illegal, it contributes to their growth. Nanes looked at Haruto and asked, "Are there any more questions?" Haruto awkwardly said that she explained it clearly and thanked her. Nanes held up a scroll of webbing and said that the payments for the large spider items they provided should be made in a few days. Haruto refused and said to give everything to Aoi. The door to the interrogation room slammed shut. Nance looked at it and said, "Well, he's clearly a difficult person to refuse the reward. Anyway, clearing a high-level dungeon by himself. Hunter Sano, you're definitely hiding something." Meanwhile, Haruto was walking down the hallway of the Hunter Association, smiling contentedly. Haruto asked to open his inventory, and a blue tablet appeared in front of him. It was the rod of the great spider. Haruto thought that these rods would be very useful to him. A few hours ago, a golden tablet appeared above Haruto. It said, "Received as a reward for defeating the great spider." The rod of the great spider has the same effect as the web of the great spider. When used, it exhibits strong adhesive properties for a certain time. Haruto looked at the rod with disappointment and asked, "What is this? It looks cool, but from the description it looks like ordinary glue. All this death, all this work, was it all for this?" He thought about maybe using it as a sticky tape against flies and mosquitoes. Haruto took the rod in his hand and began to copy it. He tapped it and asked, "But how to use it?" Suddenly, the rod began to disappear from his hands. Haruto looked around questioningly and asked, "Where did it disappear?" A blue table popped up in front of him, indicating that the great spider's rod had been absorbed by an existing skill. The insert indicators were increasing. Haruto looked at it in surprise and thought, "Can this ability be upgraded?" The blue table notified that the ability to copy an object can be improved. Haruto asked in surprise, "Can it be improved?" The blue table notified that the ability to insert an object is the first level. 3 skill options appeared. Haruto asked, "How can they be upgraded? Is it because of the absorption of the rod? Then if you copy and absorb the corresponding item, will it evolve too?" Haruto said happily, "That's so cool. By the way, was there something about new options?" He touched it, and suddenly the system announced that the inserted object can be held for a desired time. The object can be inserted anywhere for a certain amount of time. You can untie the web of the great spider. Haruto smiled and said that he thought it was a useless skill, but now he will try it, first for 1 minute. Haruto dropped the rod on the ground and sat down next to it. He thought about how he let it go from his hands, and it did not disappear. After a while, the rod disappeared. Haruto smiled madly and said that it did not disappear for a whole minute. In that case, He will copy as many as possible and set the timer for 30 minutes. For 100 years, for 1,000 years. Meanwhile, Haruto shouted happily and thought that from today on he was rich and he could finally live like a human. But first of all, he had to copy the sword of the Parisian dragon. 2 hours ago, Tokyo, the Rainbow Bridge. A blue van was moving along the Rainbow Bridge, overtaking other cars. Someone's voice ordered the lead car to maintain speed and distance. The voice on the other side received the information and maintained the current speed. Muir Grant asked, the next address, how many times has she been to Japan already? Aries, you said twice? Grant asked, did she say that his mother was from this land? Aries said that it was her mother's homeland, but not hers. Someone's voice from the front seat asked, the long sword exhibition will end in Japan, right? Did she apply for a vacation? The driver of the van said that there was something he wanted to find in the Japanese dungeons. Grant put his hands behind his head with satisfaction and said that he hoped this time he would find what he was looking for. Aries said indifferently that it was none of his business, but one day it would affect him too. Someone's voice on the radio said that at the moment the lead car was passing through the dungeon on the Rainbow Bridge. Due to the electromagnetic waves of the dungeon, communication would be interrupted for 5 minutes. Blue crystals appeared around the van. Grant looked out of the window of the van and asked in surprise, the dungeon is right above the sea, isn't that romantic? Aries told him not to talk nonsense, and if the dungeon collapses, it will be a disaster. Grant discontentedly asked for someone to open the window, because they are stuffy in here. Aries asked what is romantic about a dangerous dungeon. Grant shouted that she just does not understand, that is the whole point. At the same time, on the Rainbow Bridge, the entrance office of the dungeon. Shinoda Satoru, level 21, the Guild of Great Sages. He yawned and said how boring it was to work as a ticket collector at the entrance to the dungeon. The guy looked at him and asked, a minion, he was already lucky, and he was still showing off. 3 weeks ago, there was hell on earth. Suddenly, an unknown object similar to slime hit Satoru's leg. He looked at it questioningly and asked, what is it? Satoru picked it up with interest and exclaimed, a slime, so cute. And then asked what he forgot outside the dungeon. Satoru turned back and asked, could a slime appear on the surface? The guy in the t-shirt said fearfully, of course not, it is. Suddenly, something pressed against his back. The guy turned back and saw a large troll monster. Currently in the building of the Hunter Association. Haruto looked at the blue information table with satisfaction and said, great, all his stats have increased. It's not for nothing, it means he died so many times, now he is level 50. When a hunter reaches level 50, it is easier for him to join a group. Usually in mid-level dungeons, the monsters are just about the same level, except for the zones for beginners. In such dungeons, experience grows faster, and you can get more reward items. Sometimes you even find rare ones, so after level 50, leveling is much easier. Haruto said with satisfaction that he will copy the rods of the Great Spider and try to sell them at the auction. Haruto turned back and saw how the rest of the people were running worriedly and asking to make way. Someone's voice shouted, how could the dungeon collapse? Haruto watched in surprise and thought, the dungeon collapsed, is this really a breakthrough? The guy with the bandage on his head asked, but why were they thrown there before the big guilds? The man in uniform said that the van with the legendary sword was trapped. A request for help was received from the International Hunter Association. Haruto thought with horror, the long sword of the Parisian dragon is now surrounded by monsters from the breakthrough? Meanwhile, several airships were standing on the roof of the Hunter Association building. The man in the long coat asked to quickly request help from other guilds. Their first priority is to protect the van with the legendary items. Someone's voice asked, protect the van, what nonsense, who gave this order? The man in the long coat said that he, the commander of their squad, is giving orders now. Nance ordered them to destroy the monsters and protect the civilians. This is the most priority task. The situation is emergency, so all questions will be left for later. Suddenly, Nanace noticed in the distance how someone is trying to break through to the ship. Nanace shouted that they are in a hurry and boarded the ship faster and faster. Haruto raised his hand and asked Mrs. Nanace to go with them. He also wants to help. Nanace asked in surprise, Mr. Sano? Haruto shouted that he would go too. If he could not fight the monsters, he would help evacuate the citizens. In such a situation, any help would be useful. After a while, the airships flew to the Rainbow Bridge. Nanace said that in the dungeon of the Great Guy, he managed to save his comrade. And now he wants to help evacuate the civilians? Haruto smiled contentedly and thought that, in fact, he was pursuing his own goals. The guy asked in surprise. Isn't that strange? Only 3 weeks had passed since the closure of the Rainbow Bridge breach. Nane stood in the middle of the ship and said that anything could happen in their world, including another dungeon breach. And no matter how many times it happened, they would go to the epicenter each time, so as not to repeat the disaster of 15 years ago. Haruto thought about how he remembered these events as if they were yesterday. Simultaneous dungeon breakthroughs all over the world, an international level of disaster. In the memory, there was a city being destroyed by monsters. If the monsters in the dungeon are not exterminated in sufficient numbers, the dungeon overflows and collapses, forming a breakthrough. And then the monsters break out, attacking civilians. In this chaos, his parents died. Little Haruto was sitting in front of a woman who was crushed by a car, and behind him everything was swarming with monsters. He had never told anyone about this before, and no one would believe him. But at that moment, a supernatural being from another dimension appeared, who gave him this, as it seemed to him, a curse. A magic circle appeared above Haruto and pierced his heart with magic. The being called it a gift and set a term of 20 years. He doesn't know if it means the duration of the ability, or his life. But the hourglass of the curse continues to tick even now. Haruto remembered that back then, that creature appeared through a great catastrophe. He put his hand to his throat and thought about what it means when it appears again. Another cataclysm will happen, 5 years left. He understood how to develop his abilities, becoming the strongest hunter. Perhaps he will be able to prevent the catastrophe and lift the curse. But for this, he desperately needs the blade of the Corrosion Dragon. Meanwhile, an explosion occurred on the Rainbow Bridge. The enraged monster overturned stones and cars on passers-by. Hunters attacked the green monster from all sides. Satoru, watching what was happening, thought that there were too few of them and they would not be able to protect all the civilians. Suddenly, he noticed a monster running towards him, but he deftly cut it with his sword. Suddenly, another monster appeared behind Satoru, who tried to attack, but a dagger pierced the monster. The guy said with displeasure that he should not get distracted. Satoru smiled and thanked the guy for his help. The guy in armor warned that if Satoru relaxed again, he could not expect help. Satoru thought about how he did not mince words and called him a squirrel. However, it was the elder who saved him from the orc. Today this is the second time he helped him out. He will definitely return the favor. The guy put his hand on his head and said that it seemed that he had lost too much blood and was feeling sick. Satoru asked, "Is there news of reinforcements?" The guy in armor said that due to the electromagnetic waves of the dungeon, they cannot contact them. But they probably already know about the situation and are heading there. They should also run to the beginning of the bridge, that way they will meet up with reinforcements faster. Satoru asked, "In that direction?" The guy said that it does not matter, it is better than waiting there to die. Meanwhile, the bear monster attacked the blue van. Grant asked Ares if she was sure the van would be okay. Ares held a magic ball in her hand and said that she understood his concerns and asked him not to escalate them further. Her defensive magic was top-notch and even a level 400 monster couldn't scratch it. Suddenly, the Rainbow Bridge began to collapse. Ares worriedly said that even the strongest defensive magic wouldn't protect against something like that. Meanwhile, the airship approached the battlefield and the guy in uniform looked out the window in surprise. A large red monster appeared from the water. Nane said that it was the boss of the Rainbow Bridge dungeon, Keisha. She shouted sharply for everyone to prepare for the attack. Suddenly, the monster opened its mouth and began to gather yellow magic into it. And then it attacked the airships. Haruto angrily asked that this monster destroyed the bridge? He hoped that his long sword was intact. Meanwhile, airships were flying above the monster. Suddenly, a fireball appeared in the mouth of the Keisha. It shot straight at the ship and crashed. Nanace and the rest of the passengers on the ship fell down. Nanace landed on the ground and told everyone to listen to her and change the plan. She ordered all forces to focus on destroying the Keisha. She turned around and thought about where Mr. Sano was. She was sure that he was okay since she had a feeling that he would not die just like that. Nanace used the skill Hellfire and blue magic was formed from her staff and attacked the monster. Meanwhile, Haruto thought that this was only the second time she saw it, but it was really impressive. He would have to copy it later. A web formed around him, and the system notified him that he had untangled the web of the great spider. Haruto said that his main task now was to copy the long sword of the Corrosion Dragon. Meanwhile, uniformed people were moving along the Rainbow Bridge. The masked man with the purple cloak said that the appearance of the Keishi was unexpected. One wrong move and they could be in danger too, right? On the contrary, it would be to their advantage. Hunter Nanes and the rest of the association would be busy for a while. Destroying the boss was the fastest way to compress the breakthrough. During this time, they would take the long sword of the Corisian dragon. The masked man ordered the others to move stealthily so as not to run into the monsters. Meanwhile, Haruto walked past the corpses of the monsters and said that this was obviously the work of the hunters. The problem was that these monsters usually acted in packs. Suddenly, someone's voice ordered them to run. Satoru dealt with the monster and said that he could handle such monsters. Sakibi held his hand to his wound and told him to listen to him, since he needed to run, otherwise they would both be in trouble. Satoru asked with displeasure, how could he abandon him? Haruto watched them from behind the car and thought that they were hunters controlling the entrance to the dungeon. You can't get distracted, you need to focus on your target. They will manage on their own somehow. Sakibi asked with displeasure, doesn't he know why these low-ranking dogs are in such a difficult dungeon? When they gather in packs, their power is equivalent to a high-level monster. If he saw several, it means there are many of them here. Suddenly, a pack of fellwolves emerged from the darkness. Haruto angrily clenched his teeth and exclaimed, I don't care. Satoru picked up the sword and said with displeasure that he received these wounds because of him. Now it's his turn to protect him. Haruto looked at Satoru and remembered how he helped his comrade Aoi. Satoru began to deftly deal with the fellwolf, when suddenly Haruto blocked the monster's attack with his shoulder. Haruto turned to him and asked if he was okay. Satoru said in a frightened tone that there were still many of them. Another pack of fellwolves came out of the darkness. Satoru took a fighting stance, he thanked him for his help and told him to run away quickly. Even high-level hunters wouldn't be able to handle such a huge pack. Haruto smiled contentedly and said, well, great. Satoru looked at him in surprise. A blue table appeared in front of Haruto, and he thought about putting them up for auction later. Suddenly, a pack of fellwolves rushed at Haruto. He said that if you combine the rod of the great spider with his skill, he always wondered how effective it would be against a large group of monsters. Satoru watched in fear. Suddenly, the web of the great spider began to bind the fellwolves. After a while, a huge pillar of web and skvenwolves appeared in front of Satoru and Haruto. The system notified Haruto that his level had increased. Haruto exhaled and said that simply binding does not give a big increase in level. However, as expected, the technique works well against a pack. But he needs to find a way to attack after binding. Satoru thought in surprise that he had neutralized an entire pack in one go. What kind of skill was that? Maybe it was something high level? Sakibi thanked him for his help and asked if he was by any chance reinforcements from the association? Haruto agreed in confusion and thought about the fact that they had arrived on the same helicopter, so he was not lying in fact. Sakibi asked to take Satoru away. Satoru walked up to the man and grabbed his shoulders, refused and said that he would not abandon him even at the cost of his life. Sakibi said that he would be safe with that person. Haruto watched in surprise and was surprised by his loyalty. Satoru shouted that he would not leave alone. Haruto exhaled heavily and thought that in any case, in this state, they were both in danger. It was a pity, but there was no other way. Haruto asked to open his inventory and took out a bottle of pink liquid. He handed it to the man and told him to take it. Sakibi looked at him in surprise. Haruto said that it was a mid-level potion, he would not be able to fight, but he would be able to stand on his feet. Sakibi asked in surprise why he was giving him such a valuable thing. Haruto turned back and said with a smile, Satoru would not return without it. Satoru was surprised and thought how cool he was. Then he bowed and thanked him, introduced himself and said that he controlled the entrance to the dungeon. He asked Haruto to at least remember his name, he would definitely repay him for everything. Haruto looked at the distance of the bridge, then turned around and awkwardly asked if he could ask them for help. He was looking for the International Hunters Association van, could they tell him where it was? Satoru looked at him questioningly and asked if the hunter was disoriented. Meanwhile, the bear monster fell to the ground near the van. Grant asked if she just put it to sleep. Even as a hunter, he is a pacifist. Suddenly, a metal ball appeared in front of them, but Grant skillfully cut it with an attack. She smirked and said that he knew it, someone would take advantage of this chaos to steal the sword. Grant asked if they thought they were the first to think of this. Ares looked ahead in surprise. A masked man with his men appeared in front of them. He said that their insight was impressive. Well, let's see what they can do. The masked man attacked Grant, but he deftly repelled the masked man's attack. Grant smirked and said not to underestimate them, they are the guards of the legendary weapon. He threw the masked man aside and told him not to think that they are easy to deal with. Grant rushed to attack the enemy, when suddenly something hit his body. He fell to his knees and began coughing up blood. Aries ran as fast as she could towards Grant. Grant asked what was going on, what was wrong with him. Aries said that they sprayed a poison that deals damage and blocks mana absorption for a while. If he continues to fight, it will kill him. The masked man said, "A mage, it seems she has good intuition." They did not underestimate them, since this is just their usual way of working. Aries gritted her teeth angrily and asked, "The usual way? Using poison against humans despite the association ban?" Aries' hand began to accumulate yellow magic. She said that she would make them regret what they had done 100, no, 1,000 times. The masked man formed a fireball in his hands and asked how a mage who could not use mana was going to do this. The long sword would be theirs. Suddenly, something killed the masked man's assistant. The other masked men looked at the monster questioningly and asked what was going on. The enraged bear monster headed towards the masked men, attacking them. The masked man with the purple cloak began to disappear from the battlefield. He thought about the fact that the bear was not dead, she had only put it to sleep, they had to retreat. Suddenly, the monster headed towards the blue van. Aries said, "Now it's their turn." Grant, breathing heavily, asked if she could try putting him to sleep again. Aries asked, had he forgotten? She can't absorb mana. Grant said with displeasure that he knew her pacifism would backfire on her one day. It seemed like his bet had won today. Aries smiled contentedly and said, "Indeed, but he didn't have to die because of her." Aries stood up and charged at the monster using magic. Grant asked, "What is she doing?" Suddenly, blood gushed out of Aries' mouth. She thought about the mana absorption block, completely blocking her abilities. Suddenly, the monster charged at Aries, when suddenly a blue skill table appeared in front of her. She looked at it in surprise. Suddenly, a web began to bind the monster and Haruto appeared in front of it. Satoru asked enthusiastically, "Did he catch the Bear King in one fell swoop?" Haruto was surprised, he didn't think he could do it. Satoru exclaimed, "Sano-senpai, he's really cool." Haruto turned around in annoyance and asked, "Why is he calling him senpai? They were the same age, weren't they?" Satoru said excitedly that he and Sakibi-senpai had saved his life more than once. So he should respect and honor them both. Haruto said discontentedly, it seemed like he couldn't get rid of him now. He turned to Aries and asked if she was okay. She was from the International Association, right? Aries looked at him questioningly. Grant suddenly took out a knife and asked worriedly, "Did they also come for the sword?" Haruto awkwardly put his hands in front of him and said that they were here to help protect him. Grant discontentedly asked about the fact that they had just been attacked by a group of robbers. Why should he believe them? Haruto looked around and thought, so these corpses, they came for the long sword, but the Bear King killed them. What should he do now? Satoru suddenly took out his information badge and asked, is this really how he should thank their saviors? He risked his life for them, and they call him a robber? This man is a hunter from the Japanese Association. And he and Sakibi-senpai are the controllers of this dungeon. Haruto was happy and mentally thanked him for being on time. He smiled widely and thought about what was left to season everything with creme fraiche sauce. Haruto opened his inventory and took out 2 vials of pink liquid, and then handed it to Grant and Aries. He told them to drink this for now. It seems their wounds are quite serious. Haruto smiled contentedly, and thought that he would do anything to get to the Corisian dragon's sword. This investment would pay off in full. Haruto told them not to be shy and asked them to just drink it. Grant and Aries silently took the vials of pink liquid. Aries looked away at the Bear King. After a while, airships flew over the guys. Sakibi said in surprise, "It seems the cavalry has arrived." Satoru asked happily, "So they will finally be saved?" Sakibi said that he was not sure, and that something was wrong. Those guys had a completely different task. Several airships were heading towards Nanes and the monster Keisha. Nanes ran on the monster's flesh and shouted for them to stop attacking, because Keisha had entered the 3rd phase. It will attack the area in all directions. She descended to the ground and said that the support guild had arrived. Nanes asked to buy time until the evacuation of the citizens was completed. Suddenly, someone's voice asked, "Do they think this will stop the dungeon breakthrough?" Nanes turned around in surprise. Shirasaki Masato stood in front of her. He said contentedly that they hadn't seen Ms. Nanes for a long time. Nanes asked what he was doing here. Masato asked, "What is this stupid question for?" Nanes asked in fear, "Really? Suddenly, a red magic seal appeared next to the monster Keisha. Nanace asked him to stop immediately if he couldn't defeat it with this spell. Masato smiled contentedly and said that if he worried about such trifles, he wouldn't achieve anything. Last time, during the sealing of the dungeon on the Rainbow Bridge, the association and she, Mrs. Nanace, did everything almost alone. This time, he won't be left behind. This is his prey. He will take everything for himself. Masato used dark lightning magic. Black lightning began to strike the monster Keisha. Nanace turned to the others and ordered everyone to run. Suddenly, dark lightning appeared on the ground, after which the Rainbow Bridge collapsed. Haruto climbed onto the bridge and said that he thought he was finished. He looked down and saw the rest of the guys and the blue van hanging on the web. He thought that he was lucky. The van was fine and everyone else was fine too. Haruto turned around in fear and saw the dead body of the monster Keisha in front of him. He covered his mouth with his hand and asked, "Keisha? How did he get here? Is he dead? No, was he captured?" Masato landed on the ground next to Haruto and asked, "Are there any survivors?" "It seems he is a low-level hunter, commendable." Haruto saw the necklace on Masato and thought that this symbol, he has seen it somewhere. "This is the third Vasilia guild in the country, the Guild of the Future." Haruto asked, "It seems he is from a support guild, but shouldn't saving citizens and destroying monsters be his priority?" Masato asked, "Saving citizens and destroying monsters?" He turned to the side and said, "It seems all the citizens have already evacuated. But he seems to hear someone else, and it is not Keisha." Masato walked up to the Bear King and said, "Oh well, it is him." He touched the web with his hand and asked, "The web of the great spider?" He didn't know it could be used like that. Suddenly, the web darkened and tore, cutting the monster into pieces. Haruto watched in surprise. He thought about what he had torn apart with one click. The web that could hold a level 200 monster and a 25-ton van. And he had turned a bear into mincemeat. Was Keisha really his doing? Suddenly, a blue table appeared in front of Haruto and informed him that he had failed to obtain the item for defeating the Bear King. Masato looked at Haruto and asked, "The sound of leveling up, was that for the weak monster he had caught?" He apologized and asked, "Did he seem to have stolen his loot?" The web and that bear, he didn't think it was his doing. He had accidentally dealt the finishing blow and taken the reward. Suddenly, a large claw fell to the floor. Masato said that he didn't need them, he could take them. Haruto looked at him with displeasure and asked him to listen to him. When suddenly Nanace appeared behind him and asked, "Mr. Sano?" She exhaled easily and said as she thought. Masato asked contentedly, "Do they know each other?" So he is also from the association. Now it is clear why he did not like him at first. Nanace asked, "What happened?" Haruto looked at him with displeasure and said, "Nothing special. The support team is currently evacuating the citizens. Nanace ordered to leave with them. If Keisha wakes up, he will start to rage." Haruto asked, "Is there a chance to kill him?" Nanace shook her head in disappointment and said that unfortunately it is impossible. Boss monsters, when their HP falls below 33%, activate Frenzy or AoE attack. In both cases, they attack in different directions. Weak bosses and mini-bosses usually activate only Frenzy, which requires less concentration, without the need to divide the battle into phases. However, bosses at Keisha's level have a lot of HP and activate both Frenzy and an AoE attack, so their fight is divided into phases. In the third phase, Keisha, feeling the threat of life, carries out large-scale destructive attacks that can destroy everything around. Now Keisha is in the third phase, it protects itself with a barrier, absorbing mana from the surroundings. At this time, any attacks are useless. When suddenly the monster abruptly opened its eyes. Nanace exclaimed in fear that it woke up earlier than they expected. Masato said contentedly, "Just in time, before it starts releasing massive attacks. He will turn him into a pile of loot." Nanace turned to Haruto and said that she thinks he will be able to get out alive this time too. Masato said that it is unlikely that such a weakling will not survive this battle, but even if he dies, he does not blame them. The mortality rate of low-ranked hunters is higher than in a car accident. Haruto raised the claw of the Bear King and said, "The guild leader of the future, Masato Shirasaki. He did not mean to do this at all, but he will kill him first." After a while, Haruto ran to the other hunters. Satoru asked, "Did Sano-senpai save him again?" Aries silently examined the web in her hand. Haruto turned to her and Grant and said that he had a request for the two of them. Keisha had entered the third phase and would soon go on a rampage. With his AoE attacks, there would be no stone left unturned. In such a situation, it would be difficult to find both the van and the long sword. Therefore, he must kill Keisha, but to do so, he needed the Corrisian dragon's long sword. He would return it after his victory. Grant asked displeasedly, did he think he had enough strength to take down an entire dragon? He had helped them twice, but that did not mean they could trust him. Aries adjusted her glasses and said that it was impossible. Haruto became nervous and thought that things were bad. At this rate, the sword would be lost to him forever. Aries said that in order to remove the seal from the van, a huge amount of mana was needed. And because of the robber's poison, they can't absorb mana. Grant asked displeasedly, what is she doing? Haruto said, why didn't they tell him earlier? Grant looked at him questioningly. Haruto happily pointed at himself with his thumb and said that his nickname is Mononos. One of his skills is infinite mana generation. After a while, magical seals formed around H. She thought in surprise, no way, mana is coming. Many magical seals appeared around the van. Aries said that the seal was removed. Haruto jumped off the bridge, he thanked her, and said that he would keep his promise. Grant looked after him and asked, why did she do this? What if he thinks of something bad? Aries said that everything is fine, he recently tied up the Bear King, but did not kill him. Grant exhaled heavily and asked, is this why she believed him? Meanwhile, Haruto opened the door of the van and looked inside. He thought that he finally had the Corrisian dragon's long sword in his hands. Suddenly, a masked man in a purple cloak appeared behind him. He said that the operation almost failed, but he was glad that he decided to see how it would end. Haruto asked in fear, what? A dagger appeared in the masked man's hand and stabbed Haruto straight in. Satoru asked in fear, Sano-senpai? The masked man in a purple cloak landed inside the van and opened the container with the Corrisian sword. He said that who would have thought that the sword would be his in this way. Suddenly, a blue table appeared above him and announced that due to the death of the owner, the great spider's web was breaking. Suddenly, the web that held the van broke and they fell into the water. Haruto used the skill paste copied object and appeared behind the masked man. He said happily, he didn't think that he would get the sword in this way. Haruto thrust the sword into him and said, all the good and evil that is done to him, he returns in double amount. After which the man in the mask fell to the ground. Haruto held the long sword of the Corrisian dragon in his hand and said, in vain he coveted his prey. He happily looked at the sword and thought, the sword of the Corrisian dragon, which he dreamed of so much, became his. The sword began to glow with purple magic. A blue table appeared in front of Haruto and offered to copy the long sword of the Corrisian dragon. Without thinking, Haruto pressed the skill and said, of course. Suddenly, the blue table notified that due to the fact that the user's level does not match the required level of the object, copying is impossible. Haruto was surprised and said, what's going on? He said in shock that to use the long sword you need to be level 30 or higher, and his level has long since exceeded 50. Suddenly, someone's voice said that it looks like he lost. Nothing personal, but the honor of the Bloody Tower Guild assassin is at stake. The masked man stabbed Haruto with his sword and he fell to the ground. Blue magic appeared around the masked man's wound. He said that if it weren't for the healing skill, he would have died already. The masked man picked up the Corrisian dragon longsword and said that he would take back his own words. He pointed the tip of the sword at Haruto and said that he quickly forgets good deeds, but returns grievances threefold. Haruto thought about how hard it was for him to get there. Suddenly, a blue table notified that the Corrisian dragon longsword had merged with the user. The system copies and absorbs the characteristics of the Corrisian dragon longsword. Haruto asked in surprise, absorption? The system notified about copying and absorbing the level of the Corrisian dragon longsword. Copies and absorbs the passive skill of the Corrisian dragon longsword, the unique skill vampirism berserk. All the characteristics of the Corrisian dragon longsword have been completely absorbed. The user's HP has dropped below 25%. The Corrisian dragon longsword user defense mode is activated. The second unique skill, berserk, is automatically activated and has been inserted. Meanwhile, a white magic ball has formed in the mouth of the monster Keisha. Masato said with displeasure that he will now hit the area, things are bad. Suddenly, yellow magic flew out from under the water and cut the monster into pieces. The system announced that Keisha was destroyed and the breach was sealed. Meanwhile, in the Japanese Hunters Association, the voice on the TV said that today at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, many civilians and hunters were injured as a result of the Rainbow Bridge dungeon breach. Irreparable damage was also caused. Thanks to the prompt action of the Hunters Association and the guilds, the situation stabilized within 2 hours. However, some are concerned that the association is not monitoring the dungeons well. Fukuwa Takeo turned it off and said that there was no need to make such faces. They managed to deal with Keisha quite successfully this time. Takeuchi Gaklas, the president of the Japan Hunters Association, said with displeasure. He heard that the association had already sealed the Rainbow Bridge dungeon breakthrough 3 months ago. Shinoda Makoto said that sealing it does not guarantee that the dungeon will not collapse again. The man in uniform asked with displeasure, "Really? How much do you have to monitor the dungeon to do so in such a short time?" The man in uniform said angrily, "Once the situation is resolved, they will demand an official reconsideration of the ownership of this dungeon." Nanace wondered if Mr. Sano was able to escape. Takeuchi slammed his hand on the table and said that he was only interested in one thing. He asked, "Usually it takes at least half a year for the boss to revive, right? Doesn't that mean that Mrs. Nanace didn't finish off Keisha last time?" Nanace exhaled easily and placed her hand on the table. Suddenly, the table cracked under her hand and the shards flew around the office. A red barrier appeared around Masato, and he calmly drank from a glass. The man in the suit exclaimed, "Mrs. Nanace, what are you doing? What is this farce for?" Takeuchi got angry. His eyes turned white and a blue magical aura appeared around him. Fukuwa Takeo called out to Mr. Takeuchi and apologized for the disrespectful behavior of their employee. He apologizes on her behalf. Takeuchi clicked his tongue in displeasure and said, "She has completely lost her fear. If she continues to rush into trouble like this, then he swears she will soon die." Nanace abruptly stood up from the table and said, "It is better to see once than hear 100 times. If they haven't gotten it yet, what she just showed is a shock wave, a reward for the previous murder of Keisha." Mr. Shirasaki, who had contributed the most to their recent confrontation, would not let him lie. Masato smiled and said that he was too busy and had not yet checked the reward. However, he did not think she was lying. He wondered why she had dragged him into this. Fukuwa Takeo said that it was only thanks to Mr. Shirasaki that everything ended with little bloodshed. He thanked him for his work and the others began to applaud him. Masato looked at Nanace, but she was smiling slyly. He wondered if she was holding a grudge because he had interfered. She would still pay for it. He would not forgive such humiliation. And that guy who stole Keisha from him, he would definitely find him too. Nanace said that she would take responsibility for finding out the cause of the dungeon breach. In addition, she would also seek the responsibility of the guilds to provide reinforcements. The other hunters awkwardly turned their heads to the sides. Nanace said that it seemed that all questions for her were exhausted and that she would take her leave. The door to the office slammed shut and Grant and Aries stood at the threshold. Grant said, "Great, it seems the meeting is not over yet." He came on behalf of the International Hunters Association. He has important information that needs to be conveyed to everyone present. Due to the recent dungeon breach, the world's only Corisian dragon longsword was stolen. Grant placed a folder on the table and said that the incident occurred during transportation when the sword was on its way to an exhibition in Japan. Here is an official letter requesting assistance from the International Hunters Association. Takeuchi asked when the van was attacked, did he hear that they removed the seal on it themselves? Aries said that it was due to a request for assistance from Hunter Shinoda Satoru of the Taiken Guild and Hunter Sano Haruto of the Japan Hunters Association. Nanace and Fukuwa Takeo were surprised. Shinoda Makoto covered his face with his hand and said that Shinoda was a member of their guild. Fukuwa Takeo said that there was no hunter named Sano Haruto in the Japan Hunters Association. Nanace gritted her teeth angrily. Masato smiled and thought that this was a chance for revenge. Aries asked in surprise, "Do they mean the one who tied the Bear King with webs?" Masato said contentedly that they had a small disagreement with him. But he was surprised. He also thought that he was from the association. He asked, "What do you mean by this, Nanace-sama? It seems like she knows him. Is he the one who stole the Corisian dragon's longsword?" Meanwhile, Kurosaki Takumi was holding the Corisian dragon's sword in his hands and said, "The legendary blade, just by holding it in your hands, the level will increase by 200. It seems that the runes on the handle help to recognize the owner of the sword. The billions spent on organizing the breakthrough of the dungeon were worth it." The masked man thought, did the boss really organize a breakthrough? Kurosaki asked, he lost all his fighters, does he not want to explain? The man looked at him questioningly. He bowed and asked for forgiveness. And then said that some strange guy followed them and asked not to worry, since he was probably already dead. Kurosaki said, "I see, good work, corpses do not need money, so their share is now his." Kurosaki threw a bag of money on the floor and said that this was his reward and he could count it. The masked man thanked the master and said that now the task could be considered completed. Kurosaki refused and said that he failed it. The masked man asked in surprise, "What does this mean?" Kurosaki smiled and asked, "Who would sell the world's only legendary sword for 10 billion? He took this quest to get information about it, didn't he?" The man jumped up and said, "In their guild, a failed quest means he had planned to kill him from the start, right?" Kurosaki swung his sword and said, "Nothing personal, but he didn't need witnesses." He asked about what he hoped. "Sharon accepts yen?" Suddenly, the masked man flew out of the window, and his body was torn apart. The system announced that the durability of the Corrisian Dragon longsword had decreased by 2, 8 remained. Kurosaki adjusted his hair and said, "It would be a shame if it broke before they could fix it." Suddenly, someone's voice told him to remember, this is his gift to him. After a while, Haruto jumped out of bed and began to choke. An hourglass mark appeared in his throat. Haruto rubbed his neck with his hand and thought, "Damn, the hourglass has started moving again." When suddenly Satoru joyfully pounced on Haruto and said that he thought he would never come to his senses. Haruto exclaimed, "Why would he?" and asked him to stop. Satoru refused and said, "After he was injured, a blinding pillar of light burst out of the sea." Sakibi got up from the hospital bed and asked if he was really at the epicenter of the Rainbow Bridge dungeon breakthrough. Satoru smiled and said yes, he and Haruto-senpai and Sakibi-senpai were there. Haruto got up from the bed and clutched his head and said that his head was swelling from his energy. Sakibi said that he was the one who saved his life. Haruto asked in surprise, "How did that happen?" Sakibi exhaled and said that he considered it his duty. "This kid has raised a ruckus. Both Taiken and the association, they had a hard time. In the end, he was found on the coast." Haruto was surprised and thought, could it be that some dungeon controller made the guild and the association move? The head of Taiken, Shinoda Makoto, right? Shinoda Makoto and Shinoda Satoru, really? Haruto relaxed and said, "Come on, that's crazy, they're not in a TV series." Meanwhile, in the office of the chairman of the Hunter Association, Nanace asked, "So the Hunter Sano died after all?" Someone's voice said that he saw his death with his own eyes. Grant said that they didn't seem surprised at all. He thought about what kind of strange reaction. Nanace put her mug on the table and said that working as a hunter always carries risks. Grant looked at her in confusion. Fukuwa Takuo said that he saw his official letter asking for cooperation. Their participation in this matter as the Japanese Hunters Association is confirmed. They will do their best to help in the search for the legendary sword. Ares asked for some high-level hunters in this case. They know where the sword is. Fukuwa Takuo was surprised and said that he expected something like this. But did they really know its location already? The Corrisian Dragon sword is not a personal item. But it has runes engraved on it that can evaluate the owner's level. A personal item, an item that can only be used by a specific person. He can feel this engraving and track it. About an hour ago, someone used it again. Nanace thought about how they were not told that the engraving can be felt and tracked. That's why Mr. Sano was given permission to use it. Ares said that before it was stolen, its durability was about 10. But someone used it, and the durability decreased. Grant looked at Ares in surprise. Nanace said that it will disappear soon. This was the only clue to find her mother who had disappeared during that incident 15 years ago. A woman stood in the middle of the sea, she raised her staff up, and lightning struck and waves raged around her. Ares asked in surprise, how did she know? Nanace showed the folder with information and said that they also knew everything. They knew that the stolen longsword was her mother's heirloom. Ares got up from the sofa and bowed and asked Mrs. Nanace to help her return her mother's heirloom. After a while, Nanace walked down the corridor. She thought that Ares and Muir, those two were hiding something. And the story with Mr. Sano also raised suspicions. She did not think that he would die in this incident. When suddenly Nanace called out to someone. Makoto was standing behind her and asking if something was upsetting her. What happened? Were they overloaded with work again? Nanace said that everything was fine and asked if he had any business with her. Makoto asked why she didn't go back to Taiken. Nanace exhaled heavily and said that the number of dungeons was growing. And the big guilds, instead of protecting them, were playing capitalism. All they cared about was profit and the stock market value. If it turned out that the breakthrough that happened was the result of Taiken, they would be in big trouble. That's why she didn't want to go back. Besides, there were a lot of things in the association that needed her attention, father. Makoto laughed and said that he actually wanted to talk to her about something else, but again he said too much. He asked her to stop by the Hunter Central Hospital before leaving. Nanace looked at him in surprise. Meanwhile, at the Hunter Central Hospital, someone's voice said, "Status check." Haruto was sitting on the roof of the hospital and talking about how, although he had failed to copy the Corrosion Dragon Blade, but it looks like he managed to absorb all of his buffs. Not bad. Even if he stole it, it's unknown how to hunt with it without being noticed. And the rage was activated in time. Right before his death, he turned into a berserker. It was terribly painful. But thanks to this, he was able to tear apart Quash, whose level is over 400. The system notified about receiving a reward for destroying Quash. Absorbing Quash shockwave into copying. Copy skill improved. Quash shockwave was absorbed into copying and turned into the skill internal vibration, internal oscillations. The web of the Great Spider increased to level 2. When using the web, the unique wave and vampirism are activated at the same time. Meanwhile, Haruto was riding in the elevator and smiling contentedly. He thought about how the copy skill had evolved and now he could absorb and even merge abilities. He had just tried using the inner vibration skill. It was really cool. And besides, he was now level 276. People were looking at him in fear in the elevator because of his crazy smile. Haruto thought about how all that was left was to find the one who had injured him and gotten the legendary sword. Suddenly, someone's voice asked why she was hitting him. Haruto turned his head to the side questioningly. Nanace exclaimed, "She said that if it was dangerous, then we should run away right away." Haruto thought, "Mrs. Nanace? Can she be that stern? I wonder who was so unlucky and what does she need in the hospital?" Haruto hid behind the wall in fear. Satoru said displeasedly that it was her own fault that she couldn't completely seal the dungeon. Nanace asked displeasedly, "Are you an idiot?" Haruto thought in shock, "Sister?" "Right, they are both Shinoda." Haruto remembered Sakibi's words and said that he thought it was just a coincidence. Could it be that they are really brother and sister? Nanace asked, "So Mr. Sano is also okay, where is he now?" Satoru said, "How would he know?" Haruto looked around the corner in fear and wondered if they were looking for him. Did they find out that he pretended to be an association hunter to steal the sword? He can't be found, he must first get to the legendary blade. Haruto turned around and accidentally bumped into someone. Someone's voice said, "It seems like he survived." Haruto looked ahead questioningly. In front of him stood a displeased Grant and said that he was the thief of the legendary swords. Haruto looked at him in fear and thought, "Got caught." Grant grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. And then asked, "Where is the sword?" He ordered him to answer him quickly, otherwise he will slam him into the wall. Haruto said heavily that it was a misunderstanding. Grant asked angrily, "What misunderstanding? He was killed. But now he looks quite healthy, he was in league with them, right?" Haruto thought, "It seems like he doesn't want to listen to him, this is bad." Grant took out his sword and swung it at Haruto. Ares exclaimed, "Why did he take out a weapon in the hospital?" Grant told her not to worry, he wasn't going to use the skill. It's just that if he doesn't make this liar pay, he won't calm down. Haruto thought that he didn't want to resort to this. The system notified that the skill internal vibration was activated. A shock wave came out of Haruto's hand and broke the sword into pieces. Grant looked at the broken sword questioningly. Nanace and Satoru watched in surprise. Nanace asked, "What was that, a shock wave from Keisha? Where did Sano Haruto get it from? Also, why did his aura change so much?" Meanwhile, Erita Sarah appeared on the stage. The audience near the stage joyfully shouted. After a while, Erita Sarah got behind the red car and waved to the other girls. The girl in the t-shirt asked, "Does Sarah have rich parents?" The girl in the mask asked, "How else can you explain the fact that she drives such a car?" The girl in the sweatshirt yawned and said how cool, she also wants to drive such a sports car. Meanwhile, Sarah was driving along the highway, when suddenly a black car appeared in front of her. Sarah began to break in fear, after which she opened the window and asked discontentedly, "Who taught him to drive, an idiot?" Kurosaki got out of the car, he was holding a huge gun case in his hand. He put it on Sarah's car and asked, "Is the filming over already? Doesn't he want to go down into the dungeon?" If, of course, he wants everything to remain as before. Meanwhile, on the destroyed roof, Nanace asked, "Here? So this is the place where the long sword of the Corrosion Dragon was used." No traces remained. Ares looked at the rubble of the destroyed building and said, "It seems like they are too late." Nanace asked, "So all they can do is wait until the sword is used again?" Haruto stood there and thought, and then exclaimed, "That's right, the Bloody Tower. Anyway, when that idiot tried to kill him, he said something about the Bloody Tower Guild. Nanae said that she had never heard of such a guild. It was probably one of the dark ones. Haruto said that's how it is, even she doesn't know about it. Grant said displeasedly, if they wait for the next use, the sword might break. Nanae exhaled heavily and said that they have a lead and they will work on it. She knows a person who will help them. Meanwhile, monsters were flying above the destroyed tower and lightning was striking all around. Planes were falling from the sky and starting to catch fire. Sarah was sitting among the dead bodies with tears in her eyes. 15 years ago, a certain being gave her this power. At first, she thought she had awakened as a hunter, but it was a completely different ability. A green magical aura appeared around Sarah, healing her wounds. A green skill table notified her of the return of the object to its original state. The return skill is like a keyboard shortcut on a computer, and allows you to return everything to its original state. This ability could be used on both people and objects. Sarah lifted up a torn plush rabbit, after which it returned to its original state. So she bought broken or discarded expensive things, restored them to their original state, and sold them. Although it could not be called an ability, healing or restoration, she made money by returning people and their body parts to their original state. Sarah used the return skill on a man's injured arm. But this ability also had its limitations. And she needed money so much and in huge quantities. Meanwhile, Sarah visited the hospital. She stood next to the bodies that had fallen into a coma. Her parents were injured during the Great Calamity and fell into a coma. She tried to bring them back to their previous state, but to use this ability, she needed mana. Sarah sat between the hospital beds and tried to heal her parents. A red magical aura formed around her. Without it, she could only roll back an item or light wounds. The girl in the orange uniform held a staff in her hand. Mana is a kind of energy that only hunters can use. She then risked her life to go into the dungeon to obtain mana. As a porter, but sometimes as a healer. Sarah used the skill of returning to the wounded hand of a hunter. For an ordinary person who is not a hunter, going into the dungeon was as dangerous as entering a lion's cage without a weapon. But the funny thing is that she suffered the most damage from the neglect of her party members. Someone's voices asked, "Does she want mana? What, is she a beggar?" Sarah stood with a jar in her hands and collected mana. There were more terrible moments. Injured Sarah sat next to a dead body with tears in her eyes. She thought about how she thought this ability was nothing but trouble. She wanted to give up. Sarah held a long sword and a shield in her hands. Suddenly, someone's voice said, "I wonder if it's not enough that she begs for mana like a homeless person. She also steals things?" A man with blue eyes stood in front of her. Then she met Kurosaki Takumi. Meanwhile, in Sarah's house, Kurosaki was sitting at the table and asking, "Her house is so empty, what does she spend all her money on?" Sarah sat silently and chewed her food. Kurosaki asked again, "Does Sarah from a popular idol group really live like a hermit? 3 meals a day, delivery, fast food. Who would have thought that an idol could afford such a thing? And her life is good, everyone else is trying their best, they are on diets. And Sarah doesn't care how much she eats, because she can return everything to its original state." Sarah was irritated and silent, and listened to him. Kurosaki said that he immediately understood what kind of person she was when he met her. A man dies in front of her, and she steals from him? They are the same. Sarah glared at him. Kurosaki said that he would immediately clarify if their agreement continued. He would not care what she does, even if it concerns her work as an idol. Sarah wiped her mouth with her hand and asked that this time, why should she go to the dungeon? She asked to save up mana as usual and give it to her. Kurosaki said that he needed her help in returning one thing to its original state. On the table lay a case with a long sword of the Corisian dragon inside. He said that for this a huge amount of mana was needed, and he would not be able to get it for her now. He swears that this will be the last time she has to go down into the dungeon. Sarah asked discontentedly, "Seriously?" Kurosaki agreed and said, "He promised her a long time ago." Sarah asked in surprise, "He found an item of infinite mana generation. Is he in this dungeon?" Kurosaki closed the case with the sword and refused. Sarah looked at him questioningly. Kurosaki smiled slyly and said that if she goes, he may appear. He knows that they have an agreement not to go into the dungeons, but if she goes down there with him, he promises that he will compensate her for everything. Meanwhile, in the Guild of the Future, Haruto asked, "Informant, was she talking about Mr. Shirasaki? The guild leader who always complains about everyone bothering him?" Nanae looked at him and agreed. Haruto asked, but wouldn't it be better to ask the biggest guilds, Midas or Taiken, for information? Nanace turned back and said that they probably hold the leading position in the world in terms of information about dungeons and their management. Both she and the association acknowledged this, but his thirst for clearing dungeons is greater than anyone else's. Meanwhile, in the office of the guild leader of the future, Shirasaki Masato, Nanace asked, the heart of the giant golem? Masato smiled and agreed. He said that it was also called an item with infinite mana generation. Nanace said that it was a rare reward item that appeared when defeating a boss. The secret dungeon is the Snow Mountain of Golems, right? Masato said that was right. They were gathering information to find the heart of the giant golem. And that's how they came across the Bloody Tower Guild that Mr. Sano told them about. They didn't even know they existed, but now they know that they were secretly recruiting a team to investigate the golem's Snow Mountain. That's all they could find out so far. Masato looked at the tablet and said that they were much more dangerous than they thought. Assassinations of high-ranking people, slaughtering entire groups in dungeons, stealing items. They are ruthless and ready to do anything to achieve their goals. They are a dark guild. Haruto thought, an item of infinite mana generation. He personally does not need it, but it is certainly an amazing artifact. Anyone would want to get it, if they really found someone from whom they can knock this item out. But how is the heart connected to the legendary sword? Or was it stolen just to defeat this golem? Although this blade is already barely breathing. Is it possible that getting the heart for the blood tower is more important than the sword itself? Haruto thought about it, and said that it was some kind of nonsense. Nanace asked if the Blood Tower Guild found a giant golem, and that's why they're organizing a raid on this dungeon? Ares said that she didn't think so. Nanace and Haruto looked at her in surprise. Ares said that since the discovery of this secret dungeon 15 years ago, it hasn't appeared even once. Haruto asked in surprise how Ares-sama got such information. Ares said that she can't tell you all the details, but she has been interested in this dungeon for a long time and has been studying it. In any case, the Snowy Mountain of Golems is known for being difficult to pass. And among hunters, this dungeon ranks first among those they would rather avoid. Spade Ki, the groups go looking for the secret dungeon, but most ignore it. Masato asked with satisfaction, could it be that these assassins would form a team to clear the dungeon? Even if it wasn't a secret dungeon, there was definitely something valuable there. Haruto asked when they were leaving. Masato said he didn't know, the recruitment had already been completed, so any second. Haruto angrily gritted his teeth, thinking that this had been planned even before they stole the Corisian dragon's sword. Nanace said then they should head there immediately. She turned to Mr. Shirasaki and asked, did he have a team ready to go? Masato asked in confusion, what, why? Nanace said that she thought the Guild of the Future would always keep a team comparable to the associations. Masato awkwardly said she understood that information about secret dungeons isn't always accurate. There are all sorts of reasons why no one wants to go there. Terrible natural conditions, hordes of annoying golems. Meanwhile, it was snowing on the Snowy Mountain of Golems, and golems were moving in the middle of the snowy forest. After a while, a group of the Guild of the Future and the hunters of the association stood in the middle of the snowy mountain. The man in the jacket cut the snow golem into pieces with his sword. But the golem restored its arm and struck near the hunters. Masato said excitedly, he warned, they recover immediately. He ordered to quickly destroy the core and not give it time to recover. Masato destroyed the golems into pieces with dark lightning. Masato again ordered to destroy all the cores of the broken golems first. They will destroy them one by one. The man in the jacket destroyed the golem's core and said, it really is easier this way. Haruto said contentedly that he did not want to go there so much, but now he seems to like it, but he is still cool. Ares said as soon as they enter the dungeon of the Snowy Mountains of Golems. They need to destroy as many of these golems as possible. Haruto asked, so they have to get involved in any fight? Is this some kind of special condition? Ares agreed and said that this is one of the conditions for the mid-boss to appear. During her investigation, it turned out that this dungeon is an induction dungeon. Haruto asked in surprise, an induction dungeon, what? Masato gritted his teeth and said that's why he said it would be difficult. It means there are hidden areas. Dungeons are usually divided into zones, field boss area, final boss area, mid-boss area, and minor enemy area. If they know the route of a normal dungeon, they can quickly get to the final boss area. But in induction dungeons, they need to clear all the zones in order. If they fail to clear one zone, the rest will not appear. Ares said that it was just a guess, but probably 15 years ago, due to some error, this dungeon could not be cleared. Because of this, the secret area did not appear. Haruto asked, so for the intermediate boss to appear, you need to defeat many golems, right? Ares said that they did not know how to reset the dungeon yet, so they had no other choice. She asked to adhere to the conditions and move forward. In addition, they need to defeat him as soon as possible. If the reward for killing the intermediate boss is the key to the next area, then this is probably what the Bloody Tower came for. They must definitely get this key before them. Haruto thought that he did not care what they were planning, the main thing was to get the legendary sword. He used the web of the great spider and tied up the golem. The system notified that when using the web of the giant spider, internal vibrations are activated. Suddenly, the golem was torn apart. The t-shirt guy asked in surprise, the reward for defeating the great spider is the web of a giant spider, right? The man asked, can this useless item really be used like this? Meanwhile, Ares was destroying the golems with her magic. The large snow golem was about to attack the future guild group. The jacket guy shouted that he was going to deal a powerful blow. Nanase flew towards the golem and put her hand on it, and then used Keisha's shockwave. The large snow golem was blown apart. Nanase landed on the ground and asked, are they okay? The future guild group thanked her. Suddenly, Nanase noticed the blue jacket guy and looked at him suspiciously. She ordered him to stand still, after which the guy turned around and she asked, Satoru, what is he doing here? Satoru asked with displeasure, what's wrong? He came as an official member of Haruto-senpai's party. Nanase asked displeasedly, a member of the party senpai? Satoru awkwardly agreed and said, that's right. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Satoru was lying on the floor and asked, are they going to the dungeon? He wants to too. Haruto awkwardly watched him and said, what a pitiful sight. Satoru tearfully asked, what if they get lost again like on the bridge? What will they do then? They definitely need a guide. Haruto said, he won't be alone there. After that, he agreed and said that they were going together. Satoru happily asked, really? Haruto agreed and said, but only as a member of his party. Satoru said, of course he agrees. Finally, Haruto said that he had a request that only he could fulfill. Nanase exhaled heavily and said displeasedly, I wonder what Mr. Sano was planning. Satoru shouted in displeasure at her not to mock Haruto-senpai. He saw with his own eyes that the one who cut down Keisha was Haruto-senpai. Nanase looked at Haruto and thought that he seemed to have grown a lot since their first meeting. Also, that skill he was using now. That was definitely Keisha's shockwave, and Satoru didn't seem to be lying either. But how did he do it? Where did he get so much power from? Meanwhile, Kurosaki and Sarah were standing in the middle of the dungeon. Kurosaki told her to look at how those bees were working hard for the hive, trying their best. The masked man stuck his sword into the ground. Kurosaki said that they were reaping the benefits by disguising themselves as team members using the concealment skill. But even if they used concealment, there were high-level hunters among them, and it might feel like they would be discovered. However, people like them are not afraid of anything, they almost do not use detection skills during combat. As for them, they do not know who fate will bring them together with. Therefore, their stealth skills and the use of hidden weapons are at the highest level. They will not be caught so easily, the main thing is to act skillfully. Kurosaki said contentedly that this is the motto of the Bloody Tower Guild. He turned to Sarah and asked, is the mana collected normally? Sarah was holding a battery for collecting mana in her hands and was silent. Kurosaki said that this mana battery is expensive. It contains the mana of hundreds of destroyed small monsters. 10 such batteries were able to reopen the rift in the Rainbow Dungeon. Sarah looked at the legendary sword and asked how much would it take to return the legendary sword to its original state. Kurosaki said it would probably take twice as much. Sarah asked, so he wants to roll back the stolen legendary weapon and defeat the boss of the hidden dungeon? Kurosaki said approximately, they say there is a powerful barrier in this area. The only thing that can destroy it is the long sword of the Corisian dragon. Sarah asked where he got this information from. Kurosaki asked her not to ask too many questions and just roll back the items when he asked. Sarah sighed in displeasure and said that she was just nervous, she had not gone down into the dungeon for a long time, and he was still deceiving people. Kurosaki looked at her with a crazy look. Sarah indifferently said that she did not care, as long as their agreement was valid, she did not care what Mr. Kurosaki was doing. She thought that if she could get an item of infinite mana creation, then she would be able to bring her parents back to life. Meanwhile, Haruto was fighting with snow golems. He said that he had already buried 200 boulders, and there was still no end to them. Suddenly, a stone with a red magical aura flew into Haruto's hands. he said. Strange, this crystal is different from the others. Just in case, he will copy it before breaking it. Suddenly, a stone with a red magical aura went underground. Haruto asked in surprise, did it go underground itself? Masato landed next to him and said, it has started. Haruto turned to him and asked, what has started? Masato said that they have fulfilled the condition for moving on to the next zone. Now the intermediate boss of the location, a blinking golem, will appear. Suddenly, a blinking golem appeared in front of the group of the Guild of the Future and the others. Masato ordered everyone to retreat and release dark lightning at the monster. The guy in the jacket asked, what have you already killed? Suddenly, the golem's core flew to the side. Haruto thought that now he needs to tie the core with the web of the great spider. He used the web of the great spider and tied the core. Suddenly, a snow golem began to gather around the core, and then a large black golem appeared. Haruto thought in surprise how he didn't care about this web. He had to do something before he merged with the rest of the golems. Suddenly, someone's voice shouted for Mr. Sano to step back. Nanace released a blue column of hellfire at the blinking golem. She said that striking attacks were useless, and that they had to damage all of its fragments at once. Masato exhaled heavily and said that he knew. That's why he was looking for another way. If they didn't come up with anything, they would have to melt all of the remaining fragments here, otherwise this would never end. Haruto turned back and thought, this is it. This is the blinking golem's power. Ares said that the difficult part of this dungeon is the blinking golem, the intermediate boss. In addition, this dungeon is inductive. In order for the next zone to appear, the previous one must be cleared. And the new zone always interacts with the old one, adjusting to their battle results. After killing all the golems in the first area, the core of the blinker will appear, which will gather all the remains of the monsters they killed. Masato folded his arms and said, in other words, all the stone they defeat will then gather into one megastone. This hits the morale hard, and usually at this moment the groups flee or die. In fact, the blinker is comparable in strength to the final boss of a normal dungeon. Nanace said that in this case, there are only two ways to win, either destroy the core or melt all the remains of the golems. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Nanace looked back out of breath and exclaimed when he managed to get behind. She released a column of hellfire at the blinker golem again. Haruto watched Ares and thought that if he used the ability of the long sword, Ares would immediately notice it. It would not be possible to destroy the core with such a condition. Haruto came to his senses and thought that he had another reward item. A blue table appeared in front of Haruto, and he took out the claw of the Bear King from it. He was happy and said, right, that's different. Haruto copied and absorbed the claw. The system notified that the first skill is absorbed by the paste skill, and when used with the web of the great spider, it imposes a powerful numbness. The second skill is absorbed by the copy skill, penetrates the target, and absorbs 15% of health. Haruto was happy and thought and asked, please let it work. Meanwhile, Nanace stood in front of the destroyed golem and was about to attack. Grant asked in surprise, is she really going to melt all the remains of the golem? Ares thought, no matter how strong Nanace-sama was, if she continues like this with her mana. Nanace used hellfire again and launched it at the golem. Suddenly, the golem resisted her skill and attacked her. Ares thought that the hellfire didn't work. Did she already run out of mana? Suddenly, the web completely bound the blinking golem. Nanace asked in surprise, Lord Sano? Masato thought in shock, the web of the great spider can do that. Haruto approached him and asked him to hit him again. Masato asked in surprise, he saw it? The attack didn't work. Haruto said that he would catch the core, since they don't have time. Masato gritted his teeth and said that he would believe him this time. It would be a sin to refuse such a commander. Masato released dark lightning at the golem and destroyed it into pieces. Haruto used the web of the great spider and caught the flying core of the golem. Haruto thought contentedly that it was right not to let the core come into contact with the remains. Masato opened his mouth wide and asked in shock, did he really catch the core with a useless reward item? Is he sleeping? Nanace watched in surprise and thought, even if he became stronger, he still couldn't believe that this was possible. Come to think of it, back then in the dungeon of the great spider, Nanace remembered Haruto's words about how only the two of them survived. About how Haruto would let him join them. Nanace smiled and thought that in the battle with Keisha, and the most important moments, Lord Sano was always by his side. Ares smiled and said, the claw of the Bear King, that's his style. The future guild group happily cheered and shouted that he caught the core. The man in armor happily said if he knew that this was possible, he would have defeated the great spider long ago. Meanwhile, The battlefield was covered in the web of the great spider. Kurosaki watched in confusion. Sarah asked excitedly, what was going on? He sealed the core in a web? What the hell? Kurosaki put on his mask and said that the mana collection was cancelled. They were changing the plan and starting the operation. He ordered everyone to take positions. The masked people took the information and moved around the positions. Sarah asked fearfully, what happened? Was the situation so serious that they wanted to intervene personally? Kurosaki agreed and said that because of the strange guy, getting the key to the core would be a little more difficult. He ordered her to get ready. Meanwhile, Sarah was standing in the middle of the dungeon. Mana accumulators were standing around her. Satoru peeked out from around the corner and watched what was happening. He thought about what to do. It looks like that man is in charge, but where did he go? And that girl, why is she collecting mana? He should probably tell Haruto-senpai about this. From the memories in the hospital, Haruto handed over a large crystal to Satoru and told him to take this. This item allows for a fairly high level of disguise. Satoru asked in surprise, is he sure he wants to give him such an expensive item? Haruto scratched his head and said, so he will have to do a very important job. Satoru asked, an important job? Haruto said that Satoru will have a key role in this mission. He has to keep an eye on the Bloody Tower. Once they find the hidden room, he must immediately inform him. They will steal their plan and carry it out. Satoru thought, right, his sister and Master Shirasaki are on the other side. And most importantly, Haruto-senpai. Meanwhile on the battlefield, Haruto asked, do they want him to destroy it? Masato agreed in annoyance and said, he was the one who caught it, so this is his reward. Nane said, right, it is completely his merit. Haruto swung his sword and said, well, if no one minds. He thought about how strange it was to be treated like someone other than an outcast. He had already copied this core, so he could easily destroy it. Haruto struck the core with his sword and it split into pieces. The system announced that the blinking golem had been defeated. He received a reward for destroying the core. A golden key to the sealed heart appeared in front of him. It could be used to open a hidden door where the heart of the giant golem was sealed. Haruto raised the key up and said that he had received the key to the hidden area. Grant asked contentedly, well, how does it feel to be one step closer to the mystery? Ares said that you shouldn't skin an unkilled bear. A blue table with his information appeared in front of Haruto. He smiled contentedly and thought that with the buff from the Corrosion sword, he was already level 285. Just a little bit more, and he will reach 300th, and then he will finally be able to swing alone. He happily ran forward. Masato looked at him questioningly, and then said discontentedly, so happy about the victory, although it was only an intermediate boss. Nane smiled and said that this only intermediate made them both sweat. Masato awkwardly said, but he did not even sweat. Suddenly, black rocks began to grow from the ground around everyone. Red letters appeared on the black rocks, as if it was a seal. Suddenly, someone's voice said, this is a mine for large monsters. Masato ordered everyone to quickly hide behind his barrier. A large explosion occurred on the battlefield. The bodies of people from the Guild of the Future were scattered all over the field. Suddenly, Kurosaki appeared in front of them and said, the power is really excellent, considering the cost. No wonder they say that money can do anything. Especially if you forget about conscience. Too easy, that's what it means to act skillfully. Kurosaki looked at the ball of web unraveling with a questioning look. Haruto started attacking Kurosaki. He exclaimed, the long sword of the Corrosion dragon, and told him to give it back to him. Suddenly, blood spurted out of Haruto's mouth. Kurosaki said that he was able to dodge the explosion with the web, but that was not the only trap he set. Kurosaki hit Haruto again and said that because of him, his plan almost failed. Nanae called out to Sano in fear. A huge blue magic formed around her. She used the skill Hell Blaster. Ares shouted for Nanae-sama to stop. Grant grabbed her shoulder and told her not to go there, otherwise she would be hit too. Nanae fired the Hell Blaster at Kurosaki, when suddenly blood flowed out of her mouth and fell to her knees. Masato called out to Nanae in fear and said that they needed to use the healing skill immediately. Ares shouted that they couldn't use mana. A toxic gas was sprayed that blocked mana absorption and dealt damage when using the ability. It was probably released at the same time as that pillar exploded. It was a sophisticated and extremely evil tool that they used to paralyze the movements of high-level hunters. But why did they use such a dangerous thing? The black liquid bound Haruto and Kurosaki moved to attack Masato. Masato said in fear, unbelievable, this skill, a forbidden technique that should have been destroyed in the past. Black liquid appeared under Kurosaki's feet. Masato said, "Shadow Shift, considered the highest level in hidden techniques." Kurosaki turned to Haruto and saw a golden key next to him. He picked it up and the system notified that the key to the sealed heart had been transferred to the current owner. Kurosaki looked at the key and said that the goal was achieved. He grabbed Haruto by the neck and said that he must definitely be killed right now. Unexpectedly, Haruto said, "He was just thinking the same thing." Kurosaki said in surprise, "He is conscious." Haruto smiled contentedly and said that this was luck, because the one who stole his long sword was such an insignificant bastard. The web of the great spider began to bind Kurosaki, when suddenly thorns appeared on the threads. The masked man said this is the skill that was used when defeating the golem shift. Maybe they should run away too. Haruto walked towards Kurosaki and said that his mistake was that he dared to touch his long sword. Suddenly, the threads of the Spider King were disconnected. Haruto looked in surprise at the place where Kurosaki was sealed, but there was no one there. Suddenly, Kurosaki appeared from underground and said that he almost panicked because it was his first time using such a skill. If there was no shadow inside, he would have just died. He didn't think that such a pathetic skill could almost kill him. Now he understood all those high-level hunters he killed before. Why did they have such helpless expressions when they died? But today, he will die here. Haruto asked, "Does he know his name?" His name is Mana Absorber, because he shares mana with his comrades. For the first time, he tried to transfer it over a distance, and it worked. A magical barrier appeared around Haruto. Kurosaki said, "What is he talking about? It will end here and now." A red magical aura appeared around Masato. He angrily said that he doesn't know what is happening, but he feels a surge of mana. Just in time, he will end them, the Blood Tower Guild, right here and now. Suddenly, a red seal appeared in the sky, and under it, a white magic ball with dark lightning appeared. Kurosaki thought in fear that this was Shirasaki's wide dark lightning. This was the opposite of his shadow movement skill. He couldn't escape, this was bad. After which, Kurosaki ordered Sarah to act now and return everything to its place. Blue magic appeared around Sarah, which was emitted from the mana accumulators. The system announced that the dungeon would be returned to its original state and reset. Someone's voice asked, What's going on?" A strong wind formed around Masato's barrier. Haruto asked, "What kind of strange wind is this?" Grant said that it's not just wind, the golem's fragments are moving along with it. Haruto asked, "Are they coming together again?" Nanace exclaimed, "No way." Masato asked in surprise, "Was the dungeon really reset to its original state?" A crowd of golems stood in front of them and tried to attack the barrier. Masato thought that because of the damn poison that blocked mana absorption, they had to protect everyone with a magical barrier. But he wouldn't be able to attack the golems like that. Masato turned back and thought that at this rate they wouldn't last long, and he had to think of something. Suddenly, he noticed Nanace attacking the golems with hellfire and asked, "Ms. Nanace?" Nanace asked, hadn't he heard his name? Mr. Seno's nickname, Manono's. Masato asked, "So what?" Ares was healing a comrade and said that he was able to endlessly generate mana and share it with his comrades. They say this is his unique skill. Masato was perplexed, thinking that this was impossible. He thought only mages were capable of this. And then there was this low-level guy. To use all their potential as high-level hunters. He and Nane-sama needed a gigantic amount of mana, and at the same time he distributed mana not only to them, but to everyone else in a short time? Masato asked, "Infinite mana generation?" He had never heard of such a unique skill, if it was true. Masato thought that instead of looking for the heart of the giant golem, it would be much better to invite Sano to the guild. Masato said that everything fell into place now. He looked at Nanace questioningly. Nanace said that the underground breakthrough on the Rainbow Bridge was clearly the work of the Blood Tower Guild. Grant shouted that the problem now is that the dungeon was reset to its initial state. If they reset the dungeon again. Ares refused and said that it was unlikely. The fact that the hidden dungeon has not been discovered until now is most likely due to the fact that the logic of the dungeon was somehow broken. She doesn't know if they did it on purpose, but now the probability of a hidden dungeon appearing has become 100%. Nanace said, "But one thing doesn't add up, the golems that appeared after the reset were clearly less than at the beginning." Masato said, "Probably the debris she melted was never able to recover. In any case, they can't wait, they have to catch up with the idiots from the Bloody Tower at all costs." Nanace wondered if they really used the same method as when they broke through the Rainbow Bridge. No way, it's just unbelievable. Masato thought about Sano, those idiots didn't kill him, right? Meanwhile, the ball of web was far away from the battlefield. Haruto broke out of the web and exclaimed, how painful it was. He rushed to attack Kurosaki and ordered him to stand still. But Kurosaki blocked his attack and asked, what is he going to do, weakling? Haruto said that he would pull his eye, and for this you don't need much strength. Haruto activated the web of the great spider and tied up Kurosaki. Kurosaki came out of the web and said angrily, he will make it so that he will never be able to use it again. Kurosaki stuck the Corisian dragon longsword into the ground and a fire erupted around them. He used the level release skill. Haruto bound himself with the web and repelled Kurosaki's attack. He thought about how he had immediately defended himself with the web back then, and it saved him. The power of the longsword is truly terrifying, but thanks to this, he understood how to fully use its power. Haruto asked, how did this guy get so much information about him? Well, I'll have to catch him and question him. Haruto looked around in surprise and asked, where is he? He's lost again. At the same time, at the Japanese Hunters Association, Fukawa Takio asked Mr. Shinoda not to worry so much since Mr. Shirasaki from the Future Guild is with them. Makoto said nervously, the fact that the Blood Tower Guild is involved is a serious problem. They have too little information about them. Takeuchi said that it was true. They are capable of killing even a high-level hunter. Gathering information about them is almost impossible. But their guild Midas was able to obtain something. The fact is that the bold actions they took were largely due to the presence of the International Hunter Guild Starfield. Fukawa was surprised and asked, Starfield? Makoto said in confusion, what did an international guild forget in a Japanese dungeon? And more importantly, why did it get involved with the Blood Tower? Takeuchi said that this dungeon, despite its appearance, was one of the destroyed during the Great Catastrophe 15 years ago. The army of golems that appeared at that time was scarier than hell itself. Then the rift was sealed by one of the greatest magicians in the world, the Japanese hunter Tomoka Nishihara. Makoto put his hand on his chin and said, that's right, without Mrs. Nishihara's sacrifice at that time. It's scary to even imagine what could have happened. Takeuchi said that the heart of the giant golem sealed in a hidden dungeon is still attracting a lot of attention from all over the world. Both of these organizations are willing to do anything for their own goals, so it is possible that they join forces to clear the dungeon golem Snow Mountain. In addition, Aries Hugh, the representative of the International Hunters Association, is the daughter of Nishihara Tomoka. Makoto said that they know about this, so in addition to the task of retrieving the long sword, they needed to investigate the death of her mother. Takeuchi refused and said that Mrs. Nishihara was not declared dead. Makoto was surprised and asked that all the hunters who went missing in that dungeon were never found. Does he think she is still alive? Takeuchi looked at the tablet with the information and said that there was a surviving witness. He returned from that dungeon 5 years ago and claimed to have seen Mrs. Nishihara. Fukawa asked in surprise, is that possible? Takeuchi said that due to Starfield's secrecy, they only have partial information. But it is a fact. What's more interesting is that it is a hidden dungeon. Suddenly, the door to the office abruptly opened and a guild member shouted for an urgent report. Fukawa asked what happened. He had an important meeting. The guild member said that there was a dungeon breach and handed him a phone. Meanwhile, in the city, the guy with the phone hid behind a car and said into the receiver that there was a breach. The dungeon in the center of the city collapsed, chaos and panic all around. Large golems were moving around the city, destroying everything in their path. Takeuchi gritted his teeth angrily, and thought that these were golems of the Snow Mountain dungeon. Did the dungeon collapse during the passage? What's going on there? Meanwhile, the Blood Tower Guild group was moving through the snowy dungeon. Sarah asked if there were any problems with the passage. This was the first time she saw him injured like that. Kurosaki asked why she didn't check it herself. Sarah looked ahead in surprise and saw a huge snow cave. Kurosaki said that this was a hidden dungeon. Sarah looked at the cave in admiration and thought that she would finally be able to get the heart of a giant golem. Meanwhile, the Blood Tower Guild was moving along the bridge to the hidden dungeon. Satoru, who was disguised, continued to watch them. He looked at the cave in surprise and thought, this is the hidden area. The masked man reached out his hand to the hidden dungeon, but something got in his way. He turned to the leader and said that there was something there. Kurosaki said that it was a barrier. He thought about how Starfield warned him about it. Behind the barrier were huge chains with seals. Kurosaki thought, this is it. 5 years ago, the great magician and the strongest hunter, Tomoka Nishihara, sealed it. the heart of the giant golem of the hidden area. Kurosaki said that it was time to begin and ordered to prepare for the destruction of the barrier, and also to monitor the perimeter. He turned to Sarah and said that it was necessary to restore the sword. Kurosaki suddenly became suspicious and said that he sensed some kind of rat. Sarah looked at him questioningly. Kurosaki pointed his sword at the disguised Satoru and said, "An idiot dared to use stealth against the bloody tower." Satoru nervously thought, "Haruto-senpai, what should he do?" Kurosaki swung his sword and told him to die. Meanwhile, a ferocious rabbit of the snowy mountains ran through the dungeon. Haruto said, "It turns out there are other monsters there besides golems." Unexpectedly, the small golem dealt with it and picked up the red stone. Haruto asked, he was asking if this magic stone could be eaten? He stroked it and told it to do whatever it wanted. The small golem began to chew on the red magic stone. Haruto smiled contentedly and said that he copied it anyway. He would never have thought that the core of the blinking golem could have such skills. The system notified that one golem could be created if mana was invested. Haruto thought that the copying itself was successful, but it was a pity that the skills could not be absorbed. But this thing is really good. One core, one golem, and if he gets it, then he will have an army of golems. Haruto smiled madly and thought, this means he does not need a guild to protect the dungeons. The small golem looked at Haruto questioningly. Haruto said that if it is so big at the first level, then what will it be like at the 10th? Although if the golem grows into a huge golem, it will be inconvenient. Suddenly, the golem charged at Satoru. Haruto asked in surprise, "Satoru?" Satoru hugged Haruto and said that he thought he was going to die. After a while, Haruto and Satoru ran to the hidden dungeon. Haruto asked, "Did those bloodlings find the hidden area?" "Well, maybe it's for the best." He apologized and said that he didn't think he would be noticed so easily. He thought that since it was a high-level disguise he would be safe. Satoru said that he was fine, but the man from the future guild was not so lucky. Kurosaki attacked the man from the future guild into pieces. Haruto thought that the head of Shirasaki pretended not to care. But in fact, he was thinking along the same lines as him. In any case, the bloodlings cannot be underestimated. Satoru said that there was a girl there. Haruto was surprised and asked, "A girl?" Satoru said yes, she was absorbing mana with some device and suddenly the dungeon was reset. He thought about stopping her, but he remembered what he told him. Honestly, he felt scared and apologized. Haruto put his hand on Satoru's head and said that it was okay, he did well. Satoru asked who this girl was, he seemed to have seen her somewhere, but where? Satoru noticed a small golem and asked what kind of little thing was running after them. Haruto said that it was okay, he was his assistant. Satoru admired and asked, "Is this his golem? Does he have familiars?" "This is so cool." Meanwhile, Satoru and Haruto were sitting in front of the hidden dungeon. Satoru said that there is a hidden area behind this bridge. He thinks that if they do something careless, they will be noticed right away. Among them, there are those who can sense the hidden. Haruto turned to Satoru and asked him to bring Lady Nanace and the head of Shirasaki there. Satoru said in surprise that then he would be all alone, and they have this legendary sword. Haruto stroked the golem and told him not to worry, since he has a way to track their movements. Satoru said sadly since he says so, although he would like to stay with him. Haruto handed him the golem core and told him to take it. Satoru said this is the core of the blinking golem. He happily asked, was it really with his help that he summoned this little one? Haruto said that now it is his assistant, and besides, he really liked it. Despite its cuteness, the familiar is quite strong, it will come in handy. Satoru shed tears and asked if he can accept such a valuable gift. Haruto asked in confusion, valuable? He thought about how many of them he has. Satoru distanced himself from Haruto and thanked him. He shouted that he would bring his sister and the others right away. Haruto smiled and thought, oddly enough, for the heir of a large guild, he is quite down to earth. Perhaps this is all the influence of Miss Nanace. Haruto said that it is time to create a new assistant. He used the core of the blinking golem and began to create a bird golem. Haruto thought that it was really being created exactly according to his imagination. Now he will throw mana into it. Suddenly, the bird golem flew up into the sky. The system notified that the third skill was used. Now he shares his feelings. Suddenly, Haruto began to see what the bird golem saw. He saw Sarah and Kurosaki standing near the hidden dungeon. Haruto was surprised and thought, so this is the girl Satoru was talking about. What is she doing with his legendary sword? Sarah stuck the sword of the Corrisian dragon into the ground, when suddenly blue magic began to crawl out of the mana accumulators. The system notified her that the Corisian Dragon Longsword had returned to its original position. The sword's durability had increased from 6% to 100. The system notified her again that the Corisian Dragon Sword's durability had been restored. Sarah fell to her knees and began to breathe heavily. Kurosaki took the sword in his hands and said, "Good job, the durability has finally been restored." Haruto thought in surprise, "It can't be, the legendary sword's durability has been restored, this skill. It can't be, she is also the bearer of the gift curse. If the durability has been restored, does that mean this girl has a restoration skill? In that case, he must copy this skill." Haruto asked, "Can he copy other people's skills?" "He needs to figure out how to do that. If that doesn't work, then he will need to recruit her into his party." Kurosaki held the restored sword in his hand with satisfaction and said, "Finally, it's time to destroy the hidden area's barrier." He touched the huge chains with seals, after which a magic red circle appeared on the ground. Sarah covered herself with her hands from the raging wind. Haruto watched everything happening from the eyes of the bird golem. He was surprised and thought, this is the barrier of the hidden area? Kurosaki took the key in his hand and said, if not for the information from Starfield, he would have suffered a lot trying to break it with the key. 15 years ago, the great magician Tomoka Nishihara cast this spell to seal the hidden area. Kurosaki stuck the legendary sword into the magic circle and said that only the legendary blade of such a legendary hunter can dispel it. Sarah asked in surprise, "What does this mean?" Kurosaki said that the real owner of the long sword was Nishihara's husband, Frederick Hugh. He went missing along with his wife in that hidden area. Tomoka cast a barrier on it, and so that no one could break it, she made her husband's blade the only key. Haruto thought, really? The real owner of the sword is the most legendary hunter in the world, the sacred sword, Frederick Hugh. And his wife is the greatest magician Tomoka Nishihara and their daughter Ares. So that's what the legendary sword is for. Kurosaki said that it was time to open this Pandora's box. He used the skill of the Corisian Dragon Long Sword, level release. Suddenly, everything lit up with red light. Haruto closed his eyes and thought that his golem could not withstand such a surge of energy. And this is not surprising, because if the durability of the sword was not restored, it would turn into the same Turek as his familiar. When suddenly the chains and the barrier from the hidden area began to disappear. Kurosaki looked ahead with satisfaction and said, the dungeon gate was an illusion. Apparently he worried in vain. Well, it's time to clear the hidden area of the snow mountain. He ordered everyone to go forward, since they must find the heart of the giant golem. The Bloody Tower Guild group moved into the hidden dungeon. Haruto became nervous and thought about what to do. Should he pursue them alone? He asked Satoru to hurry. Meanwhile, in the south of Italy, an S-rank dungeon. The building was destroyed, and there were bodies of fighters. The man in uniform asked, he came for him, so why didn't he just kill him? What does this have to do with his comrades? Someone's voice said that if they only killed him, everyone would immediately understand that it was murder. But if they killed the entire group, it would look like an ordinary failed raid. Suddenly, the man fell apart. The system notified that since the owner of the ability died, the skill would be transferred to the next available user. A purple magical aura emanated from the man in the white cloak. He gritted his teeth in pain and placed his hand on his neck. After that, a red hourglass mark appeared on his neck. The man in the white cloak used purple magic on his hand and used the Select All Objects skill. The system announced that it was cutting out all selected objects. Suddenly, a deep hole appeared in the floor. Behind the man in the white cloak, a girl with elven ears stood and clapped her hands. She said that it seemed that the selection skill had fit well into his collection. Cutting out objects one by one was quite a chore, but now he saved a lot of time. The man in the cloak clenched his fist and said that in order to assign the cursed skill to him, he had to kill its owner every time, and this was quite a hassle. But what was most annoying was that even after becoming his, this skill did not evolve. It was simply unbearable. The girl with elven ears approached him and said, as she said, it was impossible to adopt someone else's skill only by killing its owner. But in order to obtain a skill without killing the owner, and at the same time be able to develop it, the copying skill was required. The man in the white cloak angrily clenched his teeth and said that he had been searching for it for 10 years and could not find it anywhere. He asked if copying even existed. The girl with elven ears smiled and said that he was in their world, although in a slightly different form. So his presence in theirs is also certain. In addition, the search skill is currently searching for the rest of the cursed. The man in the cloak asked, right, what about the return skill? The girl with elven ears said, judging by the information they received, the Blood Tower Guild had just destroyed Tomoka Nishihara's barrier. In addition to the return skill, they urgently needed to obtain the heart of the giant golem. The man in the white cloak said that without this item, they would not be able to use the full potential of the cursed skill. The girl with elven ears said that she would pass on the instructions. Meanwhile, the Guild of the Future and the others were advancing inside the hidden dungeon. Masato exclaimed, despite the fact that they were hurrying with all their might, it seems they are not there. He asked, as well as the traces of battle, did they take the wrong road? Haruto said that not much time had passed since they entered there. There don't seem to be any monsters since the road is straight, they should catch up to them very soon. Nanace turned to Aries and asked if she had any idea where they could have gotten the information from. Aries said it was just her guess, but she thought Starfield was behind them. Nanace was surprised and asked, Starfield? How come a good international guild got involved with assassins like the Bloody Tower? Aries said it was probably her mother. Haruto thought in surprise, Starfield? That's where the Bloody Tower got all the information from. Breaking into the Rainbow Bridge dungeon, stealing the legendary sword, the Snow Golem Mountain. It was all planned out. That means the upcoming expedition won't be that easy, probably. Haruto looked at Aries. Aries looked at him questioningly. He thought that the key role in this battle would be played by the Blink Golem cores, and Aries herself. Masato flew forward and said that they needed to hurry. It was easier to find out everything from the idiots from the Bloody Tower than to waste time guessing. He thought that if Starfield was behind this, then it became clear where they got the shadow movement skill from. Now all that was left was. Masato angrily gritted his teeth and said, catch them and interrogate them. Satoru and the little golem caught up with Masato. Masato asked what kind of little guy was chasing him all the time. Satoru happily said that it was his familiar that Haruto-senpai gave him. Masato smiled and asked, is the familiar a snow golem? Nanace asked, but why did he give such a valuable item to Satoru? Haruto smiled awkwardly and said, it's because he is a very valuable member of the group. Besides, he owes him his life. Nanace smiled contentedly at Haruto's answer. Suddenly, a yellow magic circle appeared under Satoru and Masato's feet, and they disappeared. Haruto ran towards the yellow magic circle in fear. Nanace, Haruto and the others stepped onto the magic circle and looked around. Nanace called out for Satoru, and Haruto called out for the head of Shirasaki. Haruto asked what was going on. They were just following them, but now they were nowhere to be seen. Haruto suddenly noticed a stone dragon attacking him. Haruto wondered where it came from. Nanace used the Witch Blade skill and attacked the monster, cutting it into pieces. Haruto indignantly asked why a dinosaur-like monster appeared in the snowy mountain of golems. Aries examined the monster and said that this place looked like they were in a completely different dungeon. It was probably a multidimensional dungeon. Haruto asked, a multidimensional dungeon? What did that mean? Suddenly, they found themselves in the middle of a forest. Nanace exclaimed that it couldn't be. She heard that the multidimensional dungeons were destroyed during the Great Disaster 15 years ago. Aries agreed and said that her mother sealed them all. However, now one of them has been reopened. Aries asked them to remember that the hidden area in the snowy mountains was also sealed. The multidimensional dungeons have magic circles installed that connect them to different dimensions. When the magic circle is activated, a portal opens, linking their world to other dimensions. There is a risk that they will end up in an extremely dangerous dungeon. Nanace said that this is why Nishihara-sama installed a barrier in that area. Aries said that her mother believed that the multidimensional dungeons were the ones that had gone out of control and were causing the great disaster. Haruto asked in confusion, but then where were Satoru and the leader of Shirasaki? Aries said that they were probably in a dungeon in another dimension. If they went through each zone in sequence, they would eventually reach the heart of the giant golem. Haruto gripped his sword tightly and said, well, at least there was a chance. He asked everyone to quickly go through this place. Suddenly, dinosaur monsters suddenly jumped out of the forest and began to attack them. Grant smiled awkwardly and said, easy said but hard to do. Meanwhile, the entire city was on fire, and the golem monsters were destroying buildings and attacking people. The bald man attacked the golem and smashed it into pieces. The man in armor shouted that if the core is not destroyed, everything is useless. The man in a t-shirt turned to the mage and asked him for mana. The green-equipped mage said that he couldn't right now. They weren't in a dungeon, his mana was very low. The sword-wielding guy parried the monster's attack and asked where was the guy who always replenished mana when needed. The bald man said that he never thought they would need Mananos so badly. Suddenly, there was a golem behind the bald man. The mage shouted that he was behind him. Just then, the guy in the suit deftly cut the monster into pieces. The green-equipped mage thanked him and asked, "Are you a foreigner?" The guy smiled and said that he was on a business trip, but he couldn't just stand by and watch. The bald man thanked him for saving him. The green-equipped mage said that his Japanese was very good. The guy in the suit asked what they were talking about before. "What is Manos?" The bald man said, "It doesn't matter, he's a low-level guy. He couldn't fight, and his only skill was infinite mana generation, which he distributed to his allies." The guy in the suit asked, "Where can he meet this person?" The bald man said that they had met a long time ago. Now he doesn't know where he is. Today he just remembered. The guy thought, the skill of infinite mana generation? He had never heard of such a thing, really. Someone's voice exclaimed, "They are finally here." The guy in the suit turned around and saw the head of the Takeuchi Guild Midas and the head of the Synod Guild Taiken on the roof of the building. He smiled and thought that it looks like they will have an interesting sight. Meanwhile, golems of different sizes were advancing through the city, destroying everything in their path. Makoto said, "A giant golem, no doubt, it is the breakthrough of the Snow Golem Mountain Dungeon." He asked, "The perfect opponent for the head of Takeuchi, isn't it?" Takeuchi angrily asked what the hell was going on in this dungeon. He ran around the building and asked to tell the chairman that the reward for this case would be taken from the S-Class equipment warehouse. Takeuchi used stone armor and turned into stone. Suddenly, a golem monster ran at him to attack. Takeuchi said, "Stones are not all the same, you idiot." He attacked it and smashed the monster into pieces. Meanwhile, pink magic appeared around Makoto, which he also smashed the monster into pieces. Takeuchi dodged Makoto's attack and said, "This old man can kill everyone by himself." Suddenly, another monster headed his way. Takeuchi asked, "Does he think he has a chance?" "He's just dust." He used a boost and attacked the monster that dropped the core. Takeuchi looked at the core in his hand with satisfaction and said that he won't let the old man get around him and kill the boss. Takeuchi squeezed the core in his hand and broke it. The system notified that the boss had been defeated and the rift had been sealed. Makoto let out a satisfied sigh. Meanwhile, the others were rejoicing at Takeuchi's victory. The system gave out information that this user did not have the copy skill. The guy thought, Takeuchi Go, the best hunter in Japan and the leader of the Midas Guild. He had managed to break through the dungeon in less than 10 minutes, and that was without any damn skills. So that's useful information. He wrote something down in his notebook and slammed it shut. The guy in the suit asked, "Has the return skill not returned from the dungeon yet?" He hopes that she hasn't died. Meanwhile, there was a wound on Sarah's body. 20 minutes ago, a horde of zombies came out of the dungeon. Kurosaki said, "A horde of zombies means they have no information about what will happen next, so they will have to rely on luck." Kurosaki took out the legendary sword and swung it, killing the zombies in one fell swoop. He said that the dimension looked easy, so maybe they got lucky this time. The system announced that he had cleared the hidden area and was moving on to the boss arena. The Bloody Tower Guild group, Kurosaki and Sarah were standing in front of a huge door. The masked man said they finally got to the boss. Kurosaki took out a golden key and said, "Apparently the key is needed for this door." He stuck the key into the keyhole and the door swung open. They entered there and saw large statues. Someone's voice asked what these were. Kurosaki said that they were just statues of gods. The masked man ran the tip of his sword along the wall and asked, maybe they were too early and the boss had not yet had time to revive? Sarah was panting heavily and wondering what he was talking about. As soon as they entered there, the air became heavy, as if something was pressing on it from all sides. She looked at Kurosaki and thought, no one notices this. Maybe they have already gotten used to this oppressive aura? The masked man said, apparently so. He then asked to just take the reward and leave from there. Suddenly the statue came to life and crushed the masked man. Another masked man exclaimed, so the statue was the boss. That means the rest of the statues too. Suddenly all the statues of the dungeon surrounded the Bloody Tower Guild group. Sarah looked at the dead body in horror and covered her mouth with her hands in fear. Kurosaki looked at Sarah in bewilderment and thought, what's wrong with her? She had seen people die more than once. Kurosaki called out to her and ordered her to come to her senses and heal him. Sarah came to her senses and ran to the dead body. She took a mana accumulator out of her backpack and looked at it in fear. She thought, there is no mana, why is the mana leaking? Mana was slowly leaking from the accumulator into the air. She thought, it can't be, the seal on the mana accumulators cannot be removed even by high-level dispel. What's going on? All the mana flows in one direction, but where? Meanwhile, the statue attacked the guild group. Kurosaki ordered not to be afraid to attack, they are big, but in the end they are just golems. Kurosaki swung his sword and attacked the statue. Kurosaki ordered to use mines for the big monsters. The masked man agreed and said that they are trying, but neither mines nor skills work. Suddenly, the statue attacked the masked man and killed him. Kurosaki looked on in horror as the statue lifted the dead body in its hand. Kurosaki gritted his teeth and said, "Damn it, if everyone dies, he alone can't do it." Kurosaki swung his sword and used the level release skill and destroyed the statues. Suddenly, the system notified that there is not enough mana to release the level of the Corisian Dragon Longsword. Kurosaki angrily asked that his level is over 300, how is it not enough mana? Suddenly, Kurosaki was attacked by a statue and an explosion went through the ground. Meanwhile, Sarah found a pillar with seals that absorbed all mana. She thought, this is it, this thing absorbs all mana. Sarah came closer to it and said what it was. She came closer to it and saw a stone heart. Sarah was surprised and said that this was the heart of a giant golem. She asked, but why does it absorb mana and not generate it? Suddenly, the heart of the giant golem moved and began to illuminate the room with a red light. Sarah tried to run away, when suddenly the heart shot a red beam right at her and injured her. She fell on the stairs and began to roll down. The monster statue noticed her and swung its sword, when suddenly Kurosaki appeared from under the ground and held back the monster's attack. He took out an advanced healing potion and splashed it right at Sarah. And then he grabbed her and ran forward. The system notified that the giant golem's heart had awakened and a boss fight was beginning. Kurosaki asked in surprise, what does this mean? After a while, Kurosaki went out the door and thought that the door was closing. That's right, he was using the shadow move skill. When suddenly the system notified him again that there was not enough mana to use the shadow move skill. Kurosaki angrily asked, where the hell did all his mana go? He rushed to the closing door and thought that the door was closing. At this rate, they would both be stuck there. Suddenly, Kurosaki threw Sarah out the door and remained inside the dungeon. Sarah looked at the door and said why. Kurosaki smiled madly and asked if she survived, she would be able to fix everything, right? The door to the hidden dungeon closed and Sarah said with tears in her eyes she was a fool, she was not a hunter, and did not know how to absorb mana. She would not be able to return everything to how it was. Sarah fainted, thinking that she went there in vain. If she dies, what will happen to Mom and Dad? It's so warm, is that mana? She opened her eyes and asked who it was. Haruto was standing in front of her. He asked if she was okay. Sarah thought, is this person the hunter who was distributing mana to everyone? Her body is gradually gaining strength, at this rate she can do it. Haruto asked if she has enough mana, she will be able to restore her body, right? Sarah thought in surprise, does he know about her skill? After a while, Masato pointed at the door and asked, they finally got there, but they can't open this damn door? Ares said that if there are still hunters inside, those who are undergoing the test, the door won't open by itself. The only way is a key, but as far as they know, they don't have it. Masato said displeasedly that they should have first defeated the revived wandering golem, and then come here. He looked at Sarah and asked who she is? Nane said that she seemed to be the head healer of the Blood Tower Guild. She was fatally wounded, but thanks to Mr. Seno's mana, she was able to restore her body. Sarah was handcuffed. Nane said that they put special handcuffs on her that suppress mana. When they get out, they need to interrogate her. Masato asked, it's easy to say, if they don't pass this place, they will be trapped, right? Ares said that it is possible. Masato nervously said that's why there are so many missing people in this dungeon. Haruto thought about what to do, should he use the key he copied. Haruto opened his inventory and took out the key. He smiled happily and thought, should he say that it was just lying nearby? Ares touched the door and thought, if this is the door that Mom sealed, then there is something inside. Suddenly, the seals on the door glowed green and the door opened. Nanace asked how she opened it. From under her robe, there was a light, the same as on the door. Ares said that this robe belonged to her mother, and it seemed to have reacted with the door. Haruto thought that Ares was the key to this dungeon after all. He would have to explore this multidimensional labyrinth with her. Masato looked at what was happening questioningly and said, magic, no other way. Satoru entered the dungeon and asked what this terrible pressure was. Nane said that everyone should be careful, and as soon as they entered, their mana would begin to disappear. Haruto looked at Sarah and asked, "Did she mean that?" Sarah agreed with difficulty. She said that the giant golem's heart absorbed the mana around it and seemed to process it into its own. Red mana accumulated around the heart. Haruto thought, mana absorption? If that's the case. Suddenly, Sarah stopped him and said that they need to leave there immediately. Even for a high-level hunter without mana. Haruto asked what? Suddenly, monster statues appeared in front of Satoru. He asked, "What the hell is this?" Nanes called out to Mr. Sano and asked for mana. Haruto started releasing mana and exclaimed that they should tremble before the great Mananos. Haruto used the skill and started pasting the copied mana. Sarah was surprised. What is this? Mana flooding the entire dungeon? And this is despite the fact that it is being absorbed at an incredible speed. She looked at Haruto and thought that with his help, she can definitely save Mom and Dad. Nanes thanked Haruto and said that this is enough to defeat those statues. She used the skill Witch Blade and destroyed the monster statue. Masato released a dark lightning and said that if he had mana, then it was just boulders, pieces of stone. He used the skill Dark Thunder Spear and attacked the monster. Suddenly, several more monsters were approaching them. Masato smiled and asked, "Did you bring your friends?" What a timely moment. He was so furious with this dungeon that he was going to let loose on them. Masato used the skill Dark Thunder Barrage and struck several monsters. Sarah saw Kurosaki in the distance and thought, "There he is." Kurosaki was injured and breathing heavily. Sarah thought that he was still breathing and could be brought back. Then suddenly Haruto approached Kurosaki and took the legendary sword. He thought, finally he has it, the long sword of the Corisian dragon. As expected, the durability was fully restored. This girl has a cursed ability. Haruto looked at her and thought that he will definitely copy her skill. But first, he would try something. Haruto touched Kurosaki with his hand and used the shadow movement copy skill on the target. Suddenly, the system reported that it could not copy because the target's level was higher than the user's. Haruto thought, I see, even with the level buff from the longsword, he was still low level. The system reported that the target had strong hostility towards the user. In this case, there were two options to obtain the skill. The first option was to kill the target and absorb the skill. The second option, forced absorption of the skill, could be chosen if the target's health was below 15%. However, the target would no longer be able to use the skill. Haruto was surprised and thought, if he considered him an enemy, then he could kill him and obtain his skill. So now he was clearly below 15%, so he could absorb without killing him. Forced absorption might be useful in the future. Masato turned to Sarah and asked, she was a healer, right? He asked to heal him to the point where he could walk on his own, nothing more. Masato took off Sarah's handcuffs and said that he had a lot of questions for him, and if he ran away, it would end badly for both of them. Sarah looked at Haruto and began to return Kurosaki's body to its original state. Haruto watched in surprise as his severed arm instantly grew back. He thought that this was a skill comparable to his, which allowed him to copy a body. Suddenly, Kurosaki began to cough up blood and smile. Sarah asked, "What are you smiling about, old man?" Kurosaki said contentedly that he told her that they would both survive. Sarah silently turned around and left. Masato put the mana-blocking handcuffs on Kurosaki. Nane said discontentedly that she hoped that he would be able to get out of these handcuffs so that she could kill him. She asked him to thank the head of Shirasaki for not leaving him there to die. Kurosaki said, as she says, the main thing is to get them out of this hell. He turned back and said, which is about to begin? Suddenly, the golem's heart began to activate and glow red. Kurosaki began to quickly run away, when suddenly the golem's heart attacked her. Satoru, with tears in his eyes, rushed towards her and the beam of the stone heart flew straight at Satoru.